Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to TacticalBassin. Today, we're diving into the world of swim baits, soft baits, hard baits, from glide baits to multi-joints to wake baits, from paddle tails to boot tails, swim bait rods, how to rig them, how to fish them. Let's go. Over the past 10 or so years, swim bait fishing has exploded nationally. It used to be a very small niche thing in the West, and it grew from there as more and more people realized the advantages of throwing swim baits when you want to target large fish. This little niche thing that I had a pleasure of being a part of very early on grew and grew, and as a result today there are almost countless baits for this category, because as it has moved across the country and across the globe, baits have had to adapt to different conditions, i.e. you don't necessarily throw trout baits for fish that are eating bluegill. You don't necessarily throw bluegill baits for fish that are eating shad and shiners. So baits have really had to go down these little individual rabbit holes and get dialed in over the last decade or more to really fine-tune swim bait fishing around the country. Now, Tim and I talk swim baits a lot. We include them in a ton of videos. But it's only once or twice a year that we take a true deep dive into the world of swim baits, because this category is enormous. There are so many baits, so many different rigging methods, rods, reels, storage, you name it. The category itself is enormous. There's no way around it. So today what I want to do is take that deep dive with you. We're going to jump into the various different types of swim baits, what they're for, how to use them, rods, reels. We're going to talk about the really exciting fun stuff. We're going to talk about some of the boring stuff that will make all the difference in the world for you. So you have to hang in there through that stuff, because the little things make such a huge difference when you are swim bait fishing. Now, I know that some people won't hang through the whole video. That's just reality, especially because of how long this video is about to be. This is about to be a full-blown swim bait seminar that you're going to need to buckle up for. But for the guy who's not going to hang in there, I get it. So I grabbed 4 baits that we'll just quickly talk about for the guy who doesn't have the interest in a true deep dive. You're just interested in swim baits in general. You want a little bit of information. The biggest thing you want is to be told which bait to throw, which one has the best odds of you catching fish. Let's start with that. Let's get that out of the way. We've got 4 baits here. Then we'll back up and we'll take the dive down the rabbit hole. So 4 baits. These are in no particular order, okay? If I could only have 4, what I grabbed is 2 shad imitating baits or general baitfish baits, and then 2 bluegill imitators. If I could only have 4, these would be them, and I've got reasons for each one. The first one, this is from Megabass. This is the 6-inch Magdraft. The Magdraft is a remarkable little swim bait, not particularly large, and you'll notice that with all 4 of these. All 4 baits I chose will not require you to own a dedicated swim bait rod. The Magdraft is an awesome bait because it is just flat out a fish catcher. It's got a paddle tail on it, so when you throw this thing out there, you just immediately start winding. All you're going to do with this bait is slow, steady swim. Now, there's a lot of other things you can do, but you don't need to do them. You just slow, steady swim that bait. You'll find that perfect speed. Speed up until it starts to get a little wobbly, and then slow down. You'll find that perfect kick, and you just leave it right there, okay? Don't do anything else to that bait. And you just chuck and wind that thing like it's a spinner bait or a crankbait or a chatterbait, and you will be amazed that sometimes the caliber of fish you're catching goes way, way up. It is a serious fish catcher and one of my largest confidence baits. I throw this thing all the time. The other soft bait, this one's from Savage Gear. This is their line through bluegill. So the line goes through the nose, and you can either go down to the belly, comes out the belly, tie to your treble hook, or you can go up and out the top and do the same. You can put the treble hook up here. Now, I personally much prefer that belly configuration on that bait. Same deal here. This is just a chuck and wind. It's not complicated. Anyone can do it. Throw it out, slow wind it back. The beauty of swim baits is that they have remarkable drawing power. Soft baits in particular rely on realism. So we've got a fairly large bait with a fairly small hook. The bait looks exactly like a bluegill, very subtle tail kick back there behind that bait. And the fish just come up, look at it, it looks right, and they inhale that thing. Because it's got that sliding hook where when you hook them, that bait can move up the line, and you've just got the treble in the fish's mouth, that really helps your hookup ratio. Well, not your hookup ratio, your hookup to land ratio. You'll land more fish with that sliding bait on the line, and that's why I like this particular bait so much. So we've got a bait for imitating shad and just general bait fish. We've got a bait for imitating bluegill. The way you fish them is virtually identical. I'm telling you right now, those two baits can get you through almost anything. Two more for you. This is called the River to Sea S-Waver. Specifically, it's the S-Waver 168. That's the size. The S-Waver 168 is a remarkable bait. Again, not particularly large, right? There are some big baits coming. We'll get to that stuff. But this is not particularly large. You don't need a dedicated rod. You can throw all of these on a medium heavy to heavy action bait caster. You'll be just fine. Most of the time, until you start getting into absolute giants. But once that happens, come back and watch the rest of the video. We'll take you down the rabbit hole. We'll solve some problems for you. But first, just go out there and catch some fish. So the S-Waver 168, when you slow wind this, has this natural S swim through the water. That's all it's going to do. And you can just do that. You can just chuck and wind the S-Waver, and it's a fish catcher. Fish come up behind it, and if your water's clear, you'll see them. They get in there and they just start following. They're looking up at that bait. They follow it, and then they come alongside and they hammer it. Now, if you're getting a lot of follows, but they're not biting, what you can do is mix some twitches into your cadence. So what we want to do is we want that bait swimming. And about every 4, let me get this hook out of my finger. About every 4 to 6 handle turns, I'm just going to add a pop, pop to that reel handle. About a third of a turn. Boom, boom, okay? So that bait's S-ing. And then when we pop that reel handle, it'll dart, dart. And then I immediately return to the S. No, don't pop, pop, and then let it sit there. Just continue your cadence. 1, 2, 3, 4, pop, pop. 1, 2, 3. So what happens is if that fish is tailing that bait, it does these 2 darts. And in my mind, what that is, and I've seen this on countless fish, I don't even know how many, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of fish, get up behind that S-Waver, and on that first dart, that imitates that bait fish realizing they're being followed. Now, this eyeball on this swim bait can see that bass behind him, and that bass goes, I'm busted. And the next move that that bait makes, the second twitch, either that bass is going to back off and just let it go, or that's their moment and they're going to commit and they're going to smash that thing because it saw them and then it tried to run and they attack. That's what makes this bait so unique. So the soft baits are incredibly easy to fish. Chuck and wind, they rely on realism, and it works. The fish just come out and mow those things down. But if they're following and not eating. Maybe they're in a weird mood. Maybe you've got something wrong with the weather that day. Maybe it's a moon phase thing. There's 1,000 things we can blame it on, right? But if they're not committing, maybe you're getting bumps, but they're not actually inhaling that thing. Switching to that hard bait gives you the ability to twitch and work that bait, and it takes it the next step. So one relies on realism, the other is using a trigger to get those fish to react. So we've got realism versus reaction. And that's why I didn't narrow this down to one bait. That's why there's 4 baits, because you need to be able to do both of those things and do them both well, even as a beginning swim bait angler. And then the last bait, this is from Jackal. This is called the Gantarelle. Now the Gantarelle comes in different sizes. It comes in a Gantarelle Junior, comes in the standard, it even comes in some great big ones. But the standard Gantarelle is the deal. This is the biggest one you can throw without needing dedicated swim bait gear. And you can throw this on full-blown dedicated swim bait gear. If you've got a swim bait rod, by all means. It's great for it, but you don't have to have it. Compared to an S-Waver, it's significantly larger. It's a taller bait. Again, 2 shad type baits, 2 bluegill type baits, depending on the kind of fishery you're on. So the Gantarelle is very similar to an S-Waver in that we're going to use a combination of a slow retrieve mixed with some action to draw a reaction from the fish. But the Gantarelle's actual behavior is very different. So when we slow roll this bait, it's similar to a glide bait. Even though it's double jointed, the joints are extremely tight. That's as far as it flexes either way. So this bait will have this slow methodical swim, and then instead of twitching it, all we do is we're winding and we just slack it. I stop reeling and I lean the rod in a little. I give the bait slack. When you stop reeling, if that's all you did and there was no slack, the bait would just stop and do this slow rise. But I don't want that, so I give it slack. And when I do that, the bait is doing its little S. And as soon as I give it the slack, it'll wander. It'll wander left or wander right. You can't control that, but it'll be doing its S. I'm winding. I lean into it, give it a little bit of slack, and it'll just drift off. Night and day different action from an S-Waver. They do 2 completely different things. Both work unbelievably well, and they seem to work at different times. Some days that aggressive twitching of an S-Waver, those fish just unload on that thing. Other times it doesn't seem to be working. I go to a Gantarelle, I let it drift out, and it's fun because with the Gantarelle you've given it a little slack. So when they hit it, it's a different bite. You'll slack it and all of a sudden it'll just, they just jerk that thing because they eat it and pull that line tight. Now, with all of these baits, here's one more tip, because again, this is aimed at the guy who's just dabbling. One more tip. The second you feel a fish touch all 4 of these baits, swing for the fences. Okay, this isn't a deal where you're winding that thing and you feel something happen and you kind of feed it to them like it's a big worm, right? We're not doing that. We're not feeding it to them, waiting for it to get heavy, loading up and swinging for the fences. All 4 of these baits, if you feel a tick, if you feel a freight train, anything, I don't care which one it is, I want you to swing for the fences the second you feel it. The reason I'm telling you that is that smaller fish, yes, will sometimes bump at the bait, okay? But those smaller fish, you could have caught them on anything else. I'm trying to help you take the fastest shortcut for the least amount of money, the least amount of effort, doing it with a standard rod, no special gear, but I'm still trying to give you a shot at catching a truly monster bass, because there have been a lot of actual 10+ pound fish caught on all of these. These baits get monster bites. The biggest fish, especially on the soft baits, because when a bass comes up and tries to inhale a bait, a soft bait will fold and go right in. Whereas a hard bait will typically hit their mouth and stop, right? It won't fold, it won't go in there. But with both, the bass, a big bass, swims up and they just vacuum and inhale the entire thing. So if it's the fish you're actually looking for, the reason you're throwing a swim bait, that true giant, that new personal best, that fish of a lifetime, a true monster, they're going to inhale the bait completely before you feel anything. And the first note of something happening that you will feel is when their lips shut on the line. Your bait is already inside. If you're a worm guy and you're waiting for that next something, the next thing you will feel is them spit it back out, and that's when you'll swing. So it's not a perfect science. It won't hook every fish, but just trust me on this. If you're going to gamble one way or the other, swing for the fences the second you feel them. These baits all have exposed treble hooks. They will catch the majority of fish that are slapping at the bait too. Set the hook, don't wait. With that, we're gonna wrap up just the bare bones basics. That was it, very simple. For the guy who just wants to check out, go out there, try and catch a fish, we're done, you made it. Now for everybody else, I'm gonna take a little drink here of my tea, and we're gonna get ready to get serious about some of these baits. Let me spread these 4 back out to their various places around the deck here. Let's take a deep dive together. What do you say? We've got a lot of baits to talk about. We've got a lot of gear to talk about. But let's talk the core of swim baiting first. Why are we doing this? What are its advantages? You know, why do we in one video talk about a crankbait, the next video talk about a jerkbait, the next video talk about a swim bait, right? Why do we bounce around like that? All of these things that we're taking deep dives into, deep diving into speed cranking, deep diving into swim baits, you know, these are all baits that do something that's truly different. And that's why we take a deep dive into these categories with you. It's easy to go out and just be a worm fisherman, right? You can go down the bank, you could throw a Senko and a shaky head, and a lot of the time you'll catch fish. But we're trying to help you do something special, do something different, catch a fish that is different. So all of these topics that we've taken a deep dive into or will take a deep dive into this fall are all topics that will help you catch remarkable fish, those standout fish in unique ways. And the swim bait is a major one of them. A swim bait is one of the best ways on the planet that you can use to target a giant fish. And again, I say target. The reason why I emphasize that word is that you can catch a monster bass on a Senko or a topwater or on anything else. But if you're going out trying to select for a larger fish, the swim bait is one of the most effective ways to do it. Now, swim baiting, even though we're about to go down this rabbit hole, I'm just going to stop right here and tell you just a fact. Swim baiting is easy. The reason it's going to look complicated today is because I'm going to try and help the guy who lives on a shad fishery, a trout fishery, a bluegill fishery, a guy who wants to catch them on a topwater, a guy who wants to catch them with a glide bait. We're going to try and fine tune each one of those categories. So if that's a category you have interest in, you'll come out the other end of this video dialed, right? You live in a lake that's got gizzard shad, we can fine tune just to that. We can fine tune just to the trout and kokanee guy or just the bluegill guy. Each one of those is a rabbit hole that we're about to take. But the actual art of swim bait fishing is simple. I mean, this is easier than learning how to throw a jig. It's easier than learning how to throw a jerkbait. It's easier than learning how to walk a topwater or particularly like a frog where you have to really finesse it. That's way harder than this. A guy with fairly limited fishing skills can take a big swim bait, learn that bait's retrieve, and have a real shot at catching the biggest fish in the lake. And he can outperform a guy who has been on that lake for 30 years, who knows the sweet spots, who knows exactly which boulders hold the biggest fish. This kid can come in here fan casting with a bait that has an unbelievable drawing power, pull those fish out and catch them and put the other guy to shame. I know this because I was blessed to live some of that myself. I was blessed to catch a lot of giant fish throughout the course of my life. And I really enjoy sharing that knowledge with other people. I really want to help you catch the biggest fish of your life. Now, before we even take the deep dive, this brings us to some responsibility that I'm about to dump in your lap. And I'm going to talk about this first because it's so important to me. I really am showing you how to catch the biggest fish in your lake. And with that comes responsibility, because I can't control who watches this video. I don't know if you will take this information, put it into practice, catch the biggest fish of your life, be super excited, take some photos, get some measurements, get a replica done, and release the fish. I don't know if you're that guy or if you're the guy who's about to go to his lake and decimate it, because I really did give you the tools to go and destroy a fishery by catching all the biggest fish and kill them. So I'm going to ask that, because I'm giving you this information, that you will be responsible with it. These giant fish, the true monsters, it takes a very long time for these fish to grow, and they are very important to the overall health of a fishery, especially if you like big fish. So big fish spawn big fish. It's an actual genetics thing. So not every fish given time will grow to a giant size. There are some fish that it's just in their genetics that even given time, they just stunt. They just don't get larger. You know, maybe they get to 2 pounds, 3 pounds, 4 pounds, and they just stall out. And they're maxed out. That's as big as that fish gets. You can, in some lakes, you can catch a 4-pounder that is 2 years old in a lake that's managed and fertile, that's in incredible shape. And in another lake, you can catch a bass that's 13 years old and it's also a 4-pounder. In one lake, if that fish died, you'd do no damage. In the other lake, if that fish died, you'd do a lot of damage if that was the biggest fish in the lake. But speaking back to genetics, same thing is true for the monsters. So in one fish will max out at 4 pounds. The next fish maxes out at 15 pounds. If we catch that fish and wipe it out, those genetics stop. Now, the argument that you hear from a lot of people is, well, that fish has put a lot of genetics back in the water. And that is true. By the time she got that size, she's done some spawning. But that fish may have another year, 2, 3, 4 of spawning. Those genetics are already proven. That is a truly remarkable fish. And for the long-term value in your lake, the ability for you to continue catching monster fish down the road, other people to catch them, your kids to catch them, putting those biggest fish back ups the chances of those genetics being more prevalent in that fishery. So these fish, not only am I asking that you release them, I ask that you be very careful with them. Try to net them. And I know if you have watched our videos through the years, you've watched Tim and I net some giants, you've watched us boat flip some giants. I'll be the first one to tell you we've done it all right and we've done it all wrong. We've done it all. There's at times where I have to boat flip a giant because I know she's coming off if I don't. But you'll notice that when I do boat flip fish, I do everything in my power, even when I've had my hands cut, to catch the line and stop that fish before they make it to the deck. I don't want a big fish to touch the deck. But if I've done my job, I've prepared, I've got my net ready, those fish are coming in, we scoop them. We take care of those fish in a soft, rubber-coated net. They never touch the carpet of the boat. We get a quick picture, we revive them, and they're gone. If they're a deep caught fish, it's as fast as possible. Get them, picture, gone, because you want to get them back down before they have any barotrauma issues. But for the most part, get those fish. I mean, you caught them. That's your fish. You followed the law. You've done your job. You can do whatever you want. I'm just asking that you think about it. Take that fish, get pictures, get quick measurements. If you want a mount, replicas last longer than skin mounts. I know, I have both. Replicas last longer. They look better. Get quick measurements, revive that fish, turn them loose. There is nothing better in the world than watching a giant bass swim away. It is seriously, at least for me, it is cooler than the moment that I catch them. I don't know what it is, but it's something about having done battle with this freak of nature. You've conquered, you've won, you get to experience all that, and then you get the choice of turning that fish out and watching them cruise back away. Because most of the big ones, if you put them in a live well, they'll get super feisty, and when you let them go, they'll explode and take off. But for the most part, after you've done battle, when you go to turn them loose, it's like you can almost tell they're thankful. They don't bolt out of there. They just cruise away. It's like they're shocked that you turned them loose, and they just slowly vanish. And watching that happen is unbelievable. All right, guys, I will get off my soapbox. We'll start diving into this thing here. I just wanted to start with that because it really is so important. I'm not holding back. This is a lifetime of information, a lifetime of knowledge that I've gained from good and bad days on the water. And I'm gonna pour it out here for you. So, where should we start? We could start with baits, we could start with rods. Let's start with some of the baits. And we'll talk about where and when to throw these things as we go. Somewhere in the baits, I'm gonna stop. Maybe I'll stop between soft baits and hard baits. And we'll talk rods before we go any further, because I know if I hold rods to the end, a lot of you will miss it. Not everybody's gonna make it to the end of the video. And that information is so critical to understand, because I can give you all the tools right down to when to be on a spot and what to throw. And if you show up with the wrong gear and you fight the fish improperly, you'll lose. So it's critical with swim baits to understand rods. But let's start off with soft baits. We've broken these baits out by category. So we've got paddle tails, then weedless paddle tails, and then bluegill baits, and then wedge tails. Swim baits in general, where do we throw these things? How do we throw them? That's all critical information too, right? And it comes down to the bait. So big fish in your lake will position on the best spots, period. I don't care what lake you're on. I don't care how much fishing pressure it gets. I don't care what your water clarity is. I can just look at a map and tell you most likely where the largest fish in the lake live. You can tell from a map. You can tell from Google Earth. You don't need years on a lake to know. And again, the reason why is that the largest bass are the most dominant. And as the dominant predator, they will take the best spots. So if you are on a trout or kokanee fishery, if this is a fishery where they stock, where there's an actual schedule and trout are being put into the lake and bass can eat them, flat out, the single best place on that lake, I don't care what lake it is, I don't care if I've ever been there, the best place on that lake is the biggest point next to the boat ramp. That's where the freak of nature lives. Now, there's one exception to that. And that is if they put those trout in a marina with docks. If they do that, the biggest fish in that lake is living right by that boat ramp under the docks, and she lives in the darkest part of the shadow under the dock. Again, the darkest shadow is the prime spot. That's the most protected place. She will take that spot. The other fish will position around her. It's that simple. Now you know where she lives. If you're a trout guy, that was it. Years of experience, throw it out the window. You don't need special places. The true freak of nature lives right there. They live where the trout come in. Now, if you're on a more traditional lake, it's a little more complicated than that, right? They're not feeding Snickers bars right off the boat ramp to these fish. Now, still a trout and kokanee lake, but they're not constantly stalking, okay? Okay, a little bit more complicated, but still so easy. We know that trout and kokanee are pelagic, which means a lot of the year they like to live away from the bank. They'll go out and they'll roam open water, especially in the warm months. They'll go out and they'll suspend. They'll find the cool water, they'll suspend and live at that depth in the lake. So with that in mind, we know that the food, a lot of the year is offshore. It's away from the bank. So the biggest fish will take the longest points or the biggest humps that are out in open water. So if you look at your map, you've got those points that stick way out in the main lake, or maybe it's just one big point. She's there. If there's a hump out there in open water, she's around that. It's that simple. They're going to be on the best spot where a pelagic fish, an offshore open water fish, the trout or the kokanee, is most likely to come near. They're likely, if that hump tops out at 25 feet of water, in the summertime, she can sit on the side of it, and it is likely that kokanee will come near and she can ambush up and eat them. Now, for guys that are in shad fisheries, whether that's threadfin shad or gizzard shad, there's times when those fish are up really shallow and bass will be corralling them. There's times where they're offshore. So same rules apply. When they're out, fish will be on those outside main structures looking for them. If there's a lot of flow, you know, the Tennessee River where I live, there's a lot of places that have current through them all over the country. That's why you see fish in the summertime go to the ledges. They're out there on those ledges where they're using current and their food is being brought to them. The giant fish are lazy. They're not going to work hard for a meal. They would rather ambush than have to chase it and pursue it over some huge distance. Bluegill eaters are the ones that are the most spread out. If you are on a very large lake that is full of bluegill eaters, you will actually have to do some work. And the reason why is that bluegill like to be up around cover. They'll be in grass beds, they'll be around docks, they'll be in laid down trees, they'll be in all those things. And the bass will be in all those things as well. So they're a little more spread out in those fisheries. If it's a pond and they're bluegill eaters, this is a lot easier. But the same rule is going to be true whether it's a pond or a giant reservoir where they're both bluegill eaters. And when I say bluegill, I'm talking bluegill, sunfish, you know, it's just panfish in general, crappie, all that stuff. They behave fairly similarly. I mean, crappies school a lot more of the year, but they behave similarly enough that we're going to lump those panfish together, okay? So even if you're on a bluegill lake where there's bluegill pushed into the shallows all over the place and there's bass that eat them all over the place, the rule will still apply. The most dominant bass, the biggest bass, will still take the best spot on the lake, and you can usually figure it out with Google Earth or with your mapping card. What you're looking for is a place where two prime things come together. Okay, so you got a big cove, and it's got, for this example, I'm just making this up as I go, right? Let's talk about a big reservoir. So we've got a big lake, maybe it's 10 miles long, 20 miles long, and we've got a big cove off the main body. The back is a huge grass flat, and there's just rows of docks going in there, okay? Rows of docks, 20, 30, 40, 50 docks headed into that cove. It's hard to know where the true giant would be if you drive your boat into the cove and look around. It's totally overwhelming. But if you get on an aerial view and you look at it, so get your phone out and look at it, we're looking for where things intersect. So I'm looking for one of two things. I'm either looking for the dock that reaches out to deeper water, the one that's different. If every dock is sticking out and they all make it to 7 foot of water, and there's one that sticks out further and it makes it to 12 foot of water, that's where the giant is. She's on the one that's different. She's on the one that's got deep water access. If they all seem to be the same, she will be on the dock that is nearest that shallow backwater that has the bulk of the food. So she'll take that last dock in the run before it gets too shallow. That'll be her home. And then as we go through the year, right, fish make some moves. So I'll also see them sometimes at the very other end. That last dock going out. Because maybe that fish part of the year is eating bluegills. Part of the year she likes to go out offshore. Well, then we'll intercept her on the farthest one out, the longest dock, and the farthest one in. Now, obviously, to get from A to B, she went through the rest of the docks, and it's possible you could catch her on a random day passing through. But those are not docks that she is going to stop on and spend an extraordinary amount of time. We're trying to narrow things down. We're trying to make fishing easier, to play the odds, to put them in your favor, to come in contact with the biggest fish in a lake or in that part of the lake. Now, pond guy, way easier. We look at your pond, we're looking at the best piece of cover. Is there a laid down tree that sticks out further than the others? Is there a shallow flat that comes up and then meets a deep edge? Maybe your little creek channel comes in there and goes right down and turns off a flat. She'll be right where the shallow meets the deep. She'll take that sweet spot. Okay, with that, we're gonna transition, because we could go down this rabbit hole for another hour, right? We could describe different scenarios and where the fish would be, but I think we've beat on this dead horse enough that you guys have got the concept. These fish are taking the sweetest spots. It doesn't matter what your specific lake looks like. They're taking the sweetest spot. With that, the only other thing you need to know is to throw a bait that is big enough to catch her attention. That's it. So let's take the dive. Let's start talking about soft baits. Okay, that's where we'll begin. To kick this off, we're going to talk about boot tails. Here's a boot tail. Here's a wedge tail. Okay, very different actions come out of these two tail types. So we're starting with the boots. Boot tails do a remarkable job of imitating bait fish. Shad, whether that's a threadfin shad or a gizzard shad, shiners, anything like that. All of those bait fish species tend to be erratic. Some are more erratic than others, right? Gizzard shad are psychotic, but they're all erratic to an extent, and a boot tail does a great job of imitating that more erratic movement and catching a fish's eye. So if we're in a fishery where we're primarily around those shad species or shiner species, you will see me spend the vast majority of my time throwing a boot. Ooh, that was a big blow up. First bait up is a Megabass Magdraft. We already talked about the 6-inch. This is the 8-inch. Now there is also a 10-inch, and it is significantly larger, and it's a great bait too. The biggest striper I ever caught, I caught on a 10-inch Magdraft. It's an amazing bait. But if I had to choose one as a serious swim bait angler, you already know this is one of my favorite baits. We just talked about it. But if I had to choose just one as a serious swim bait angler, it's the 8-inch. The 8-inch has that same action as the 6-inch, but it has way more drawing power. The beauty of a swim bait is it is a large enough meal that it can pull fish from a distance. They will come to it. All you have to do is get their attention. You don't have to be particularly accurate. You don't have to be a great caster. You don't have to know exactly where the sweet spot is. If you're worming, you have to know where the boulder is. You got to come over the top of the boulder and drop in, not spook that big fish, but get her attention, have her turn around and notice the worm. You get a big Magdraft within 6 or 8 feet of that fish, she'll feel it. She's got a lateral line. She senses movement. This is displacing a lot of water. She'll feel it and she'll come to it. This is an unbelievable bait for catching big fish. Now, the Magdraft is a bait that I have latched onto in the last few years. When I lived in the West, it was not my favorite bait. It just wasn't. I had a lot of other baits that I liked throwing. I spent a lot of time throwing glide baits. But when we moved east, there were a lot of people glide baiting. So I went back to a lot of soft baits. Now, we throw glide baits too, obviously. But I picked up some of the soft baits that I had left behind for years. And I was amazed how well that worked on a lot of the eastern fisheries and southern fisheries, and I've just done so well with that bait. And there's a reason we're starting with that one. I've lost track of the amount of 6, 7, 8, 9 pound fish that I can consistently blast on this thing without a care in the world, without being dialed in. I can show up to a brand new fishery I know nothing about, treat this thing like a spinnerbait. I'm just rolling it, right? I can throw it in open water. It's big enough that I can draw fish up. I can use it for so many things. I skip docks with them in the spring. When the fish have pulled up shallow, I can skip the Magdraft up under docks. I can count it down for the guys that are using live sonar, because that is a thing. It has grown, it has entered swimbait fishing, and today we're not going to ignore that. We'll address it a little bit. For the guy who is using live to like search out brush piles, things like that, the bait has a moderate sink rate. It gets down very quickly, and then I'm able to slow roll at a very consistent speed and track level without rising. It's very good at holding its depth and coming over the top of, you know, offshore humps, brush, things like that, and pulling fish up just like it does up around shallow cover. It's just an incredibly universal bait, and one that I really, really like. Now, this next one, this is from JSJ. This bait is called a loose caboose. JSJ is made by Josh St. John. He's a good friend of ours, and this is a bait that I've been really impressed with. It's, we'll get to the next bait. Spoiler alert, it's a burrito, okay? The burrito comes in a 5 and a 6. The JSJ comes in a 7. And then the Magdraft comes in a 6 and an 8. So this is sort of the in-between. If I want to throw a jig hook in that in-between size, I go to this bait. I've been very impressed. It's a silicone bait, so it's extremely durable. Now, because it is silicone and it's handmade by a single guy, they cost quite a bit more. That's just reality. Silicone baits by themselves, material costs are drastically higher than plastisol baits. So you just will pay more for them. But they're incredibly durable and they last a long time. I really like this bait. This is another bait that I spend a lot of time, so I can slow roll bottom. I've done a lot of ledge fishing with it. Done a lot of multi-species fishing with it too. In fact, here's one laying here from when I was striper fishing the other day, throwing a white one. It's great for fishing offshore, for fishing deep, but I actually do really well skipping docks with them too, because it's just a jig hook, nothing to get tangled, nothing to have problems with, super easy to skip. The other cool thing about swim baits, for the guy who's just getting into this, you can look like a hero, because when you see us skipping docks and we shoot a swim bait 20, 30 feet back up under a dock, it looks like we've been doing that for our whole life, right? And truthfully, we have. We're pretty good at it because we've done it for a very long time. But I'm telling you right now, you can learn how to do that in a matter of minutes. It'll take you longer than that to fine tune it, but a swim bait weighs so much that it wants to go. It's easier to skip than a jig or anything else. Super easy. You send that thing low and flat to the water, it wants to skip. It'll go extremely well for you. And it's, again, you look like a hero because it looks a lot more complicated than it is. But that is a really good bait. The next one is the burrito. These three baits they represent, I mean, 80 to 90% of my soft bait fishing in any given year. And it's that narrowed down for me. I spend so much time with the boot tails, and these baits are what I throw the vast majority of the time. The rest of what I throw is either situational or there's one other. There's one other that I throw a little bit more often than the rest. But the burrito is a major, major player for me. They come in a 5-inch and a 6-inch, okay? There's a size difference for you. The 5-inch is quite a small bait, but it just gets big bites. I mean, I'm looking at this one, the eyes are all scratched. Again, silicone baits, so super durable. They have really cool color patterns on them. This one's all scratched to pieces from fish teeth. Grabbing it, the eyes are all scratched on. But I blast fish on these things. Now, these three colors, I grabbed them for a reason. These are all colors that Tim and I designed. So these are tactical colors. We have nothing to do with Buka's baits. You know, Buka and Gill created a partnership for the burrito to become mass produced. If you've thrown swim baits a long time, you know that whole story. But we came along, realized how deadly the burrito was. I mean, we were blasting fish on these things. And we went to Mike Bucca and said, hey, there's some other colors here. There's some things that you really need to have. Can we talk about it? And out of that first came Tactical Shad, which is like a electric shad meets a Tennessee shad. It is just such a fishy color. And then we caught so many fish on that, we came back to him, we're like, look, that bait is unbelievable, but it's also super natural. And there's a lot of times that the water is more stained than that, and we need a little something more. So we did Tactical Gizzard and then Tactical Chartreuse Shad. So all three use that same like purplish blue glitter in the backs, but here we're like a very ghosty belly. Here that goes to a true solid belly with a little bit of gold and silver flake in it. And then here it's that like lemon ice. It's chartreuse, but it's not an overbearing chartreuse, right? It's not like true chartreuse. Just a little bit of chartreuse glitter inside that belly to create three totally different colors that work in totally different situations. But the burrito is a remarkable bait. I can fish them shallow, I can fish them deep. It comes in a medium and a fast sink. I spend the vast majority of my time with the fast sink because even when I'm fishing shallow, I like to fish fast. I like to wind my baits and that allows me to wind those baits very quickly. And then I also do a lot of ledge fishing with them. Throw them out, let them go to bottom. You can fish a burrito effectively in, 5 to 7 foot. You can fish it just as comfortably in 20, 25, even 30 foot of water. They've got enough weight that they'll get down and they'll stay down. I throw them on different gear than I throw some of the other swim baits. And again, we'll pause here when we get to the end of soft baits and we'll talk about that because the burrito, I do throw it on a completely different rod than everything else. But just unbelievable baits. Now, I've got two more for you. And these are budget-friendly baits, okay? It's the guy who doesn't want to break the bank, but you do want to dabble, you do want to catch some big fish. Things are tight right now. Totally get it. Totally get it. Especially when we're talking about silicone baits, right? You will pay more for a silicone bait. There's no way around it. There's a lot of money that they've got to put into just the materials to build that thing. That brings us to these two. These are my big bite baits. This is the B5. This is the B6, okay? Very simple baits. In fact, you can see the weight inside that one. It's just a tube with a weight in there. Very, very basic. Line goes through the tube, comes out the belly. There it is. I just pulled it out of the bait. And you tie it to that treble hook and you just stab it in the belly. That's it. The 5, I've lost track of how many big smallmouth and spotted bass I've caught on that thing. It's crazy how well that thing works, especially when I'm in the north. It's just a great size. It's got a great kick to it. It's a very simple bait. There's nothing fancy about it. That's why they're not expensive, but they just work. And I brought them back to the TVA, to the Tennessee River, and caught a bunch of big largies on them. Then the B6 came out. Same exact thing, just a little bigger profile. It'll save you a lot of money over some of the more expensive baits. And again, they work. And that's all you need to know. I mean, just chuck them and wind them. They're a less expensive option for the guy who just wants to dabble. It'll get you going. Now, I've got one more oddball here for you. We just talked a lot about the Magdraft, right? The one thing I didn't say about the Magdraft is that it does have some limitations. I talked about counting that thing down, using it on live, and who cares? You don't have to have live. You can fish it deep offshore. I go out to offshore humps and stuff, just fire it out there blind, let it go down. I'll let it hit bottom, and then I pop it up off bottom, and then I'd never let it touch bottom again. That's how you avoid snagging. Now, we have ways to get them back. If you do snag them, we'll get to that too. But that's how I fish that thing. But sometimes I want to go even deeper, and sometimes I want to be able to fish faster while I'm deep. We're about to switch to weedless baits, and we'll talk about the Magdraft freestyle there. But before we've even made that switch, let's talk about the Magdraft freestyle. I never see anyone doing this with a freestyle. I love taking a Megabass 6-inch freestyle, and I clip about, I don't know, it's a little over a 1/2 inch off of the bait. I kind of cut the eyeballs in half. That's where I like to cut. And that gives me a smooth face on that thing. And I used to use a variety of different hooks. I used the Matt Allen Swimbait head for years, but this year I came across a head, and you know it's got to be good if I stopped throwing my own head to throw it, right? But my own head never made it up perfectly to the profile. My head was unbelievable on like a 5.8 or a 6.8 or 7.8 Kitech. The way they mate together just looks so good to the eye. But when I cut a Magdraft freestyle, it's a little bit flatter, a little bit taller, and sometimes it just bugged me, even though they would eat it. Well, I really got into doing some inshore fishing the last 2 years. Tim and I have kind of gone down that rabbit hole now. And a buddy of mine introduced me to the Diesel. So these are made by Z-Man. Let me close it. The Diesel Eye jig heads, okay? These things are nasty. I mean, this is not something you necessarily need in freshwater. This hook is vicious. You could hang me from this hook. It's a true saltwater hook. It is brutal. I mean, you're putting it up against fish over 100 pounds and not bending this thing out in the salt. But you can take this same hook in a 6/0. This is a 3/4. The one that's in here is a 1 ounce. And I can thread that thing into a 6-inch Magdraft, and my profile is perfect. Now this one's been beat to death. That's why they're not mated flawlessly. It's already been chewed on. But this bait right here catches them. So there's some advantage here because I can go to a 1/2, a 3/4, or a 1 ounce head. Again, it's a nasty 6/0, but I can set that with a jig hook or a jig rod, you know, 7.6 heavy, 7.7 heavy, something like that. A true pool cue, just boom, hammer them with it because you can't bend it, period. You just can't. Not on bass tackle. You cannot bend the hook out. But by going to a lead head like this, that allows me to make very hard bottom contact. What I mean by that is when you're down bumping bottom with a soft bait, everything is a little mushy as you make contact because it's a soft material touching bottom. So whether it's on mud or sand or bumps a log or bumps a rock, it's all just sort of mush. You're not super connected. When we switch over to a solid head, when I make contact, it is much more vivid. What's coming up the line is much clearer. I can tell exactly what I'm banging into. And if I know my spot, like I'm looking for some isolated rock, I know exactly when I'm on it. This works day and night, right? For night fishermen, this can be life-changing because your contact is so much clearer that you get a very clear mental picture of what you're fishing, even though you can't see with your eyes. It really helps. But this setup has allowed me to do 2 things. It's allowed me to take a Magdraft, which as you've heard is one of my favorite soft baits to fish. And it's allowed me to fish it deep. And I mean, I'm talking deep. I'll fish these in anywhere from 10 to 12 foot out to 50 to 55 foot. A 1 ounce head will fish 20 to 50 plus, no problem. And the beauty of going to that heavy head is that I'm able to fish faster. So you can get, a lot of swim baits, you can't even get them deep, right? You can't get them out there, get them down, and even fish them because as soon as you start to reel, they just start to rise. It's really frustrating. Some baits weigh enough, you know, a JSJ, a burrito, you can get them down and you can fish them. But again, this lets me make a better point of contact. And then in the 1 ounce, I can go even faster. So it's one thing to find a bait that you can get out there and fish deep and actually be able to fish. It's a whole nother thing to have a bait at that depth that you have different retrieve options with. This has opened a lot of doors for me and allowed me to fish my swim baits faster, to be more erratic, to pop them. Like if I bang into a rock, I can pop them, snap them up off that rock and then let them fall back. I can be much more aggressive in ways that I normally couldn't. And it has caught me a lot of fish, a lot of bass, a lot of striper, a lot of inshore species. I use this thing for all of those and it works very, very well. Now, continuing that freestyle, we're going to switch gears to some weedless baits. Okay, I've got 4 of them for you. Well, 3 of them. 2 of them are rigged differently. This is that same bait, the freestyle, only this time it's got the face on it. So right half through the eyes is where I make my cut. So I guess it is a little more than ½ an inch, but that's where I like to make my cut. The freestyle is a bait that allows us to go anywhere. We just talked about taking it super deep, which is something I've just done the last few years. But historically, I've always fished the freestyle weedless. This one is rigged on an owner beast. That's the A-dot. This one is rigged on a BKK. The beast, just a standard swim bait hook. The BKK, when I want to have a blade underneath. That Titan Diver Plus gives me a great blade option. These are both super cool. Now you'll notice this one has a ton of lead on it. One of the things I love about the beast hook is that I can throw it all the way up to 3/4 ounce. And that's what that is. That's a 3/4 ounce on there. And I throw that a lot. So weedless is going to allow me to fish through all the junk, right? The Magdraft, standard Magdraft, will allow me to fish over the top or around a lot of cover. Skip it under a dock, swim it mid-column. Look at live electronics, count it down, swim it over a brush pile. Going down the bank, throw it across the laydown, swim it up over the top, and call fish up. But there are days where they don't want to come up, and that can be really, really frustrating. Insert the freestyle. I can go weedless, and then I skin hook it so it's truly weedless, and now I can go anywhere. If they're in a brush pile, I can slow crawl through it. I can crawl up and through the branches, let it fall down between them, bring it back up over the next branch, fall down. I can throw it way up under docks, so let it go to bottom and bump the bases of the pilings. Or if you're fishing grass, you can fish it in and around hydrilla beds, throw it back into tules and reeds and cattails and run it through them. It just opens the door to throw a swim bait in so many more places. And I mean, I'm serious about this. Like, I've grabbed my weedless swim bait hook box, all the sizes, all the options, right? But the vast majority of this is either, in fact, it's the entire box, is either owner beast hooks or the BKKs. It's one or the other, that entire box. And again, in the video description, I haven't even said this yet in this video. If you're not familiar with our videos, the video description below the video is a wealth of information. As much as what we talk about in the video. We'll link everything that we talk about in the order that it appears so that you can easily find it. All the links go straight to Tackle Warehouse. So if you want more information on a bait, you want to see an up-close photo, you get all that there. Just click the link, it'll take you straight there. We organize it that way so that you don't have to sit there and just take copious notes. And hopefully you haven't been doing that without realizing that we have that there for you. If you're on YouTube, you open that description, hit more to open it, and it'll all be there. If you're on Facebook, it'll be a single link that takes you to our website, and then we can lay it all out, because we can't fit them all there on Facebook. If you're on our website, if you're watching this on TacticalBassin.com, more power to you. Thank you. And it's all you have to do is scroll down. It's all there for you. That's the easiest place. But no matter where you see this video, all that information is broken down for you in a very simple way to help you find them in the order that we're talking about them. And with baits, we'll give you our favorite colors for every single bait. You know, when I'm talking hooks, I'll give you the exact weight, the exact size, all that stuff. All right. We're down 1 bottle of tea. We are just getting started here. We got 2 more weedless baits. This one is from Scottsboro, and this is the 7-inch. The 6-inch and the 7-inch are both really good baits. I've thrown both of them a ton. They've got 2 or 3 colors that I really like. Fish them on those exact same hooks. Here's that same 8/0 owner beast, but in a lighter weight. Look at the difference. Huge difference. But that Scottsboro is another very fishy option. It's got a great body roll to it, as well as that tail kick. And it's just, some baits just have it. There's so many baits in these categories, right? We could pull 20 or 30 weedless baits, but I'm trying to give you just the baits that I have tons of confidence in. Just the baits that if I'm going out and that camera's not even on and I'm gonna throw a weedless bait, these are the exact baits that I'm choosing from. I've spent years, decades, honestly, multiple decades, as much as I hate to say it, narrowing down my swim baiting, expanding it, and then narrowing it down to just those key critical baits. And you don't need all this stuff. As we're talking through here, I'm trying to explain what I use each one for. That way you can focus in on just that, right? If you're only fishing deep, you can ignore the shallow baits. If you're only fishing shallow, ignore the deep baits. That's why I'm trying to give you as much information about each one as possible. Ooh, I just felt some raindrops. We have got a nasty storm blowing in today. If it gets bad, we will have to pause this video. I don't know if we'll have to take it indoors or what we'll have to do, but I've got a calm spot. It's ripping out on the lake. I've got a calm spot. I felt some drops. Hopefully that just blows by. I'll sit here in some rain, but if it gets torrential, we'll probably have to take it indoors. But hopefully that doesn't happen. I don't want to speed this up. I don't want to go too fast because we'll miss important information. That brings us to the last of the weedless baits. This is an NLBN bait, so no live bait needed. This is a 10-aught. It's a bigger beast hook. This is a saltwater bait, but it absolutely has some crossover into freshwater. This bait has a very unique tail to it. It's like halfway between a paddle tail and a wedge tail, and I wasn't sure what to expect, but it behaves very much like a wedge tail, which we're about to get into. This is the crossover bait. So this is the only weedless option in that other tail style, so I wanted to include it now. But I throw this on a 10-aught. It's a flat-topped bait. So if you're fishing truly thick vegetation, a flat top will allow you to really bury that hook point, just like that, get it nice and tucked in, and then when a fish comes in and hails that thing, it just pops right out. As opposed to a bait that's got a rounded back, where they've got to eat it a little bit better to get it out. Now, one thing about the weedless style of baits is that we do hook set differently. So earlier, I talked about, sorry, I'm choking on the smell of some of these. My hands are now coated in that like oily plastic, and every time they get too close to my face, I'm sucking that in. It's making me gag a little bit. But I've talked about, you know, setting right away with all those baits that have treble hooks on them. Same with jig hook baits. Just crack those fish right away. The weedless baits are the only exception. Now, I still tend to crack them right away because through the years, I have dialed my hook set in so far. My hook set is brutal and it is fast. It is lightning fast. I crack them with everything I've got. The only sad part, the only negative, is that I can't just turn that off. So it is very hard for me to slow my hook sets down. So even with weedless baits, I tend to crack them right away until I've missed a few and I get really frustrated, and then I slow it down. But with a weedless, that's the one bait where when they inhale it, it takes just a moment for that line to start to load, and then you can pull. And it's not, I'm not telling you to wait a long time. Like, you feel that bite, I'm still going, but I don't just go to this like lightning crack. Well, usually I do, let's be honest, but I miss some of my fish. So after I've slowed her down, I don't just go to that lightning crack, okay? When they eat it, you start to pull, then smash them. The reason why is that when they eat a weedless bait, I start to pull so that the bait starts to collapse and expose the hook. Then you crack them. If that thing's good and buried in there and you go to crack them, sometimes you'll just pull it right out. You need it to collapse first. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit different hook set on the weedless baits. Now with that, let's switch over. I said wedge tails, but let's switch over to the bluegill baits. Then we'll talk wedge tails. Then we'll pause baits. We'll switch over. We'll talk about rods and some of this stuff for a while. Then we'll come back. We'll talk about all the hard baits. Then we'll talk about storage, how to get your baits back, how to save money, all that stuff. So bluegill baits. We've already talked about where bluegill eaters are going to position. So that makes it very simple. I'll just grab the handful of baits. And there's only 4 of them, so it's not very complicated. And the first one we've already spent a bunch of time talking about. That Savage Gear line through is an excellent bait. It is just a fish catcher. I prefer to position my treble on the belly. By positioning on the belly, the bait is extremely stable in the water. What I mean is very much upright. If we move the hook to the top, it'll have a little bit more wander to it. The only time that I'll do that is if there's just so much weed and junk in the water and I've got to stay above it. Anytime that I can, I'm going to put it on the bottom so that I can just wind that thing. And my goal with this bait is to stay above the cover. So I'll throw it over the top of grass, along docks, you know, down the edge of a tree. But obviously with a bottom treble, I'm not going to get down in the junk. Oh, that was loud. I don't know what that boom was. Next one, from Matt Lures. Matt Lures makes a variety of bluegills. This guy with that wedge style tail is by far my favorite. We've got a jig hook on it. Very similar bait in terms of how I'm going to fish it. Chucking and winding is how I like to fish these baits. And then in the spring, obviously you can sight fish with these baits as well. Bass hate bluegill around their beds. You can physically sight fish like on a bed, but you can also spend a lot of time throwing these just fan casting in the spring. They work really well for that as well. And then the little guys. We've got from Megabass, this little guy, the sleeper gill. The sleeper gill is the only weedless bait in the bunch. So the hook lays down inside the fin on the back of the bait, and then the top is hollow, so it'll collapse and expose that hook really well. If you've got to throw it in and around grass, this is a phenomenal option. Now, this little guy is a little guy, right? He's much smaller. So while it is a swim bait, we're no longer targeting giants. It's not that you won't catch giants, but you're not targeting them. This will catch everything. So keep that in mind, and you'll throw it on a much smaller rod, just a typical jig hook rod. You'll be fine. Something that you would throw a jig or a Texas rig on, you're good to go. And then one more. These are the smallest baits in this video, but the bluegill category, I throw a lot of the small stuff, so I didn't want to neglect them. This is the Savage Gear. This is their little RTF bluegill. This is the 4-inch. That RTF bluegill stands for ready to fish, so it's also a jig hooked bait. So we've got, in that downsized profile, we've got the Megabass, which is weedless. We've got the RTF, which is an exposed hook. But both just chuck and wind, cover in water, in and around cover. All right, we've got wedge tails yet to go, and then we will be out of the soft baits. Wedge tails are a little bit different animal. Wedge tails, historically, we used to imitate trout and kokanee, but there's a lot of times where they can imitate shad well too, as long as those shad aren't going crazy. So let's talk trout and kokanee type baits first. I grabbed 2, okay? Very simple. We've got from Savage Gear, the 8-inch RTF trout. And then from Huddleston, we've got the 8-inch Huddleston Deluxe. Both are very similar profiles, very similar in how we fish them. The RTF comes with a stinger hook on it. I actually changed them out anyway, so that's neither here nor there, but I love that it has this split fin that hides that stinger wire. I absolutely love how that sits in there. But both of these are amazing baits. I caught the biggest bass of my life on an 8-inch Huddleston, and a lot of other double-digit bass on that bait as well. So while I don't throw it as much today, I could not possibly neglect it and leave it out completely, although I have left it out in some videos in the past. But today I really thought through the baits, and even though I don't throw it that much anymore, it is just a bait that proved itself time and time and time again. I mean, truly, I've landed dozens, plural, dozens of double-digit, actual 10 to 17 pound bass. My biggest one is a 17.2, and she came on an 8-inch Huddleston. It was actually an ROF 5 though, not a 12 like this. But the 12 is my favorite. ROF 12, that's my favorite bait. That's the one I've caught the majority of my big fish on. And then with the Savage gear, I like the heavy. So this comes in a heavy sink and a medium sink. I like the heavy. The heavy is the one that gets it done for me. Again, whether I'm throwing the heavy in this or an ROF 12 in that, I feel like that heavier weight helps that bait track really well. And I have a lot more speed options. I can slow it down. I can speed it up. I've got a lot of really good options. Now that brings us to that stinger hook. Okay, stinger hooks are sort of they're their own animal. If you're going to add a stinger hook to a bait, because a lot of people do. So, bait comes with just a jig hook. 95% of the time, that's enough. Man, it is starting to rain. It's not big drops, so it's just drizzling, but it's just a heavy moisture. Hopefully it doesn't get worse. I'm really hoping. So, a jig hook is good enough. It'll catch them. But some people insist on adding stinger hooks. And I've been in some situations where, for whatever reason, the fish are just acting weird and it requires a stinger hook to hook them just on a random day, right? They're just in a mood. Who knows why? If you're going to add a stinger hooks can be dangerous to the fish. I've already got up on my soapbox and lectured you guys on fish care, so I'm not going to do that again. But I'll just make note that if you put trebles on the belly of the bait, especially on the back portion of the bait, the odds go through the roof of you hooking that fish in the gills and hurting them. Now, a lot of the baits that I throw, like a Magdraft, it is a belly hook treble, but it's forward. And every once in a while, I will stick one in the gills with it. I feel terrible about it, and I get them out very carefully, but usually I'm good. It's when I add one back in here that you're going to have serious problems and you're going to start hurting a lot of fish. So if you need to add a treble, I highly recommend you always put it on the back of the bait. That drastically reduces the odds of that hook ending up in that fish's gills and doing serious damage. If it's on the back, it'll usually end up in the roof of the mouth. The reason that most people add a stinger hook is because they're catching or they're getting bit by small fish and the fish aren't hooking up. So they add a stinger hook hoping to hook some more of those fish. And then it's a battle, because now you've got a giant swim bait rod versus a fish that's on a little tiny hook, and it's a gamble whether or not you're going to get them. But I understand wanting to hook them and at least get the shot. I get it. The reason that I add them is almost always some baits, when you stick those fish, you hook them and you've got them and they're pinned and you're going to land them. If you're grinding. We haven't even gotten to how to fight these fish yet. And it's different for different types of baits. But with a soft bait, stick them, grind them, get them in the boat, you'll be fine. But certain baits, there are just a handful of baits on the market. And honestly, most of them aren't even in this video. But there are a handful of baits where the bait will sort of work its way out of a fish's mouth during the fight. So if you fight them for too long, you'll notice, you hook them. The old Baitsmith Magnum was the king of this. You'd stick a double digit. I've got an 11 pounder on. I'm grinding that fish. She comes up and she head shakes and you can't even see the bait in her mouth. Grinding. She comes up and jumps again, and now I can see the nose of the bait sticking out of her mouth. Grinding. I'm trying to keep her down, but she comes up again. Next thing I see, next time she jumps, The face is out and the tail is out. It's sideways on her mouth now. And the next jump, it's out. The Magnum was a killer for that. If you threw a Magnum with just a jig hook, the bait would walk out of their mouth. So for that bait, we had to add a stinger. And here's the thing, don't misunderstand. The goal was not to hook the bass on the stinger. So it didn't matter if it was a big hook, a small hook, a 1X hook, a 4X hook. It didn't matter. The whole purpose of the stinger for me is that when the fish inhales the bait and I stick them, the stinger catches somewhere in the back of the roof of the mouth, and its job with that Magnum was just to keep the bait inside the fish's mouth. That was its whole purpose. I wasn't fighting them on that hook. I was fighting them on the jig hook. That was just to keep it from walking forward and popping out. So if you've ever seen that, if you've ever seen a bait work its way out and then they come up and jump and spit it, you now understand. And the reason why that happens is complicated. It has to do with the shape of the bait and the shape of the harness inside of the bait. So most baits don't do it, some do. If you happen to love a bait where it seems like a lot of your fish can come up and come off, the Osprey was another one. The tournament talon, the top hook Osprey, was another bait that could walk its way out of a fish's mouth. A little top stinger will go a long way. And I'm actually, let me just take a minute and I'll show you. This is the stinger wire that I use. So there's lots of ways to do stingers, okay? I have attached them with braid through the years, you know, 50, 65, 80, 100, 150 pound braid, tying stinger hooks on. It's very, very hard to get your distances right when you do that. And then it's such a short length of braid that it can get shocked and break. But I've done it. I've also used mono and fluoro. Well, I've got mosquitoes on me all of a sudden. It is a gloomy day. I've done it with mono and fluoro, both tying and with crimps. The issue with crimps is that unless you have been crimping a ton, you've been doing it for years, you never know for sure if you have under or over crimped until you have a fish on. If you've under crimped, you'll hook a giant, she'll start bulldogging and the crimp will pull. And you'll wind up and you'll still have your line sticking off the top of the bait, but the treble will be gone. If you've over crimped, same thing will happen, but it'll be cut off at the crimp. It breaks. So crimps have their own inherent set of problems. So years ago, I started just using standard wire. My buddy, Adam Hinkle, was the very first person who showed me this. But this is stainless wire. It's called toothproof wire. There's a handful of brands that make it. I'll link wire in the video description for you. This one is 174 pound, which is what I use on all of my bigger baits. You can use a lot lighter wire, no big deal. What do I have to cut with? Yeah, that'll work. Let me just cut a length of wire here. I'm just gonna show you the idea because it's really easy. And I can already tell you as I do this that somebody's gonna get mad when they see that I cut my wire off at the end. I know you can twist it and pop it. Don't worry about it. All right, for now we're just gonna take a Huddleston because it's got an exposed jig hook. This will be really easy, okay? So I've got my piece of straight single strand wire. This is how I do stinger hooks. And we have dedicated videos for this, okay? But it's been, honestly, it's probably been a lot of years since we've done one. So it's easier just to watch it right here. I take that wire, I'm gonna put it around that jig hook and I'm just gonna kink it there. Just get a good kink to it, okay? So now there's my wire, there's my jig hook. All I'm gonna do is lay it over that jig hook and I'm gonna bring that wire around and twist it over. So it's just made a loop. I can still, if I turn it the right way, I can get it off there, okay? Nice and tight loop. And then all I'm gonna do is twist. This is called a haywire twist. I don't need a special tool. I can do it with my fingers. I'm just using leverage to twist it. By the time I get 2 or 3 loops, this thing's done. But because I'm a little bit crazy, I usually keep going a little ways. All right, and then you can just clip it off. And this is not gonna clip it close, so I'm just not even gonna try. But that's it. That's a haywire twist. I don't know if you guys can see it or not. Hopefully you can see it. It's just single strand wire that is just twisted around itself. Well, I'm gonna try and clip it a little shorter just so I don't kill myself when I do the other one. But I'm still gonna leave it super long because I don't have side cutters in the boat right now. I'll just shorten it enough that I don't totally kill myself. Now I just have a loose stinger hook. Here's one. I just need any old treble hook just for the sake of showing you guys, okay? Now I'm gonna set my distance. So I take my swim bait, take this old treble hook, doesn't matter what one. I'm gonna choose where I want it to be. And since there's a rip in this bait right there, that's where I'm gonna put it. Okay, so that's where I'm gonna put that stinger hook. So I just gauge where my wire is gonna lay. And I put a little kink in that wire. Now, we're going to do the exact same thing. So I've got my wire on there, or I've got my hook on the wire. Okay? And then it's just a matter of twisting. That's all it is. Bring it around. And no matter how many times you've done this, it always just takes a little bit of doing, but you just twist. And she's done. Clip my tag ends off, and we're ready to rock. That right there is bulletproof. That stinger hook setup, and I wasn't even going to do one for you guys today, so I didn't even bring any side cutters to cut them close, but just clip those wires close, and you end up like this. There's one that I made previously. Hopefully you can see it. That single strand, 174 pound wire gives me a bulletproof connection from my bait to a stinger hook to help pin my baits in place. The only thing you ever need to worry about with single strand wire, if you catch, I don't care if you hook a 4-pounder or an 18-pounder, she's not breaking 174 pound wire. And you can use lighter wire, you can. I like 174 because it lays down flat on the back of the bait anyway. I love that it's a neutral color. And I like that there's just nothing ever going to go wrong. You can use this for a bunch of fish. You know, I can catch fish all day long on it. It won't fail. But if the wire kinks during a fight, okay, gets a kink in it, you know, you get them in the net, they're thrashing, they're going ballistic, and they kink the wire, it's time to change it out. Because when you're talking about catching swimbait fish, we know that you can catch small fish. But at any moment, you can hook the biggest fish of your life. And you need to do everything you can to put the odds in your favor of landing the biggest fish of your life. We're not out here trying to catch the mediums, right? If we wanted to do that, there's a lot of other ways to catch them. We're hoping to catch the true freak of nature. So pay attention to the details when you're swim baiting. We're going to get into rods, line, all that stuff. Details matter. Because when we get into the true giants, you need to put as many odds in your favor as possible or you're going to lose. So if you kink a wire, sit down, take the time, twist up another one. You don't need a bunch of tools. It's not complicated. If I wasn't talking while I was doing it, I've got a new one on there in a minute. It's no big deal to change that wire out. And make sure that your next cast is made with perfect gear, with perfect connections, ready to rock. All right, we've got 3 more wedge tail baits, and we are done with soft baits. 3 more shad imitators. Okay, so we just talked trout and kokanee imitators. That 8-inch RTF and that 8-inch Huddleston are amazing trout and kokanee imitators. You can choose your colors accordingly. That is my favorite color in that Savage gear. It's got that purple glitter in the back, that bluish purple glitter, the same stuff that's in the back of all of our tactical colors in the burrito. I love that color. I don't know why it catches my attention, but it does. My confidence is sky high in it. I catch a pile of fish on it. Now, Shifting over to shad imitators, we've got 3 baits here. All, again, are wedge tail type baits. So these are baits that are going to be very stable. I will throw the boot tails when I'm imitating shad most of the time, because I like the way that tail moves. I like how fish respond to it. They get aggressive with it. They attack it. But there's a time and a place, especially if you're on a really clear water reservoir, where a methodical wedge tail, slow kicking, just seems to fool those fish a little better. This is the Matt Lures Hammertail Shad. This is a bait that I've done a lot of damage with through the years. It's a very good shad imitator. Again, it's just an upright, you don't get a lot of action out of the bait. It's all back there in that wedge tail doing its thing. It's a very fishy bait, and it works really well in Gizzard shad lakes. The next one is from Huddleston. It's the Huddleston 68. So they took the 6-inch Huddleston that we had way back in the day, and they mated the 8-inch Huddleston tail to it, because the little 6-inch Huddleston never had it. It being that magical whatever, the magical it factor where fish just eat it. Some baits have it, some baits don't. The 6-inch Huddleston, to me, never had it. But when you go to that 8-inch tail on the 6-inch bait, that has it. Fish munch that thing. It works really, really well. It's the tail that wags the dog. It can kick hard enough to get that little nose wobble going, and they just plow that thing. And then last but not least is a bait that just came out. They are becoming available this fall. We were able to snag one from iCast. From Z-Man, this is their Shadtron. This was one of the coolest things to come from iCast this year. This bait release was something I was stoked about. So it's a wedge type tail, but it's a Laztec material. It's a Z-Man bait. Super durable. You have the ability to, oh, it's a line through. That's it. That's where this is headed. That's the punchline. So you can go line through, top or bottom. Look at that jig hook. That jig hook is nasty. So I like to go through the nose, tie to that jig hook, and run it in the back. And that bait is just absolutely brutal. I love jig hook baits. I love when I pin a fish on a jig hook, I've got them. And even more so when you've got them on a line through. And I've put a bunch of time into this bait already, because again, we were able to snag some there at the show, and that bait is a fish catcher. Super consistent action. It's a great size, comes in some unbelievable colors, and in a weedless option. I mean, I just cannot say enough about that thing. That's a bait that's going to do a lot of damage going forward. And that jig hook is in there very secure. When I push it in, it slides right in, and then at the end it sort of clicks into place, and it's in there. It's not like this thing is flopping around where it's going to tip over in the back of that bait. It's in there solid. I really like that one. And with that, we wrap up soft baits. You guys are doing great. You're hanging in there. We've got a ton of hard baits that we need to cover, but before we do that, let's talk some theory on rods, line, all that stuff. When it comes to rods, this is definitely the most overlooked part of swim bait fishing. I see a lot of the discussions online, and guys will pain over custom baits, right? They just, anything that they can get their hands on that's unique and different, they'll spend huge sums of money on these things. And you'll notice that in today's video, the vast majority of what we're talking about are baits that are widely available. The reason why is that through the years, Tim and I have strived to find the best baits that work in the most situations and people can actually get them. Because it's completely worthless information if you can never get your hands on the bait, if you're on a 2 or 3 year waiting list. And then the most remarkable thing is, to be honest, these baits that are widely available tend to have the most consistent actions and work in the most situations. We catch a ton of fish on very generic available baits, and people think we're kidding. And it's not like we don't own all the stuff, right? We own all the fancy custom baits, make no mistake. If I'm a fanatic about jigs and chatterbaits and spinnerbaits, you think I'm not a fanatic about swim baits? I've been doing this longer. I grew up swim bait fishing. But a lot of these baits that are, factory built baits, ABS baits, they have very consistent actions. They work unbelievably well. And for the average angler are a much better choice than a custom option. Now, when it comes to rods, I take a similar approach. There are a lot of custom rod builders. There are some great rod options out there on the custom market, but there are some amazing rods that are widely available as well. When it comes to swim bait rods, I want you to take a few minutes with me. Sorry, I'm sucking on a cough drop. Started getting hoarse there for a minute. But I want you to take a few minutes with me and think through swim bait rods, because we need to put more thought here than we do into the baits. The reason why I say that is I can take a Magdraft and a Huddleston and a slide swimmer, whatever, go fishing, learn where these big fish are, target them, and these baits are capable of getting lifetime bites, but they're not capable of landing the fish for you. You will get a lifetime bite and then everything will go wrong. And I say that from experience. For every teener that I've ever caught, I have more than one story of a teener that has broken my heart. I've lost teeners at the net. I've lost teeners in the net. I've lost teeners that I tried to boat flip and bounced off the console of the boat and they went back out. I've had teeners jump and come off. I've had teeners dive deep. I had a teener break me on a straight pole. I saw her and she broke me on a straight pole on straight 30-pound mono. Things that can't happen, but they've happened. So when I speak with confidence, I don't come from a place of guesswork. This is not stuff I read on the internet. This is not things that my buddies and I talked about and dreamt up. This came from decades of serious swim baiting, trying it all. Like, I'm going to talk about braid. And there are people that get so fanatical against braid for swim baits. You can't do that. It doesn't work. You lost your mind. I can do it. I do it. But those guys don't realize that I had 4 to 5 years of fishing straight mono before I went to straight fluoro. And then I had years of fluoro before I went to braid. And then I had years of braid before I went back because I wasn't happy with my knots. And then I had more years before I came back to braid and I started going to knotless saltwater connections into hollow braids, splicing to solve the knot problem. Then deciding that that was too complicated because shock was still an issue. And I came back to straight fluoro, ultimately settling back to braid with connection knots, with knots that I have all the faith in the world in. See, we don't take the time to talk about the fact that years and years and years of actual catching fish over 10 pounds on all of these things have happened before settling. I just say, I like braid, and then someone else says, that doesn't work. Today, I'm explaining these things for you. So, when we take a dive into swim bait gear, you need to pour as much thought into rod, reel, line as you do into bait selection, okay? And the type of rod that you need can be very different depending on your circumstances. My favorite all-around rod, if I could just have one, is this rod right here. And this is no shocker to anyone who's ever seen me talk about a swim bait. From G. Loomis and the IMX Pro line, this is the 966 SWBR. The 966 is a remarkable rod. There were years where you couldn't get them. Years that they were just out of stock. But right now they're back, and they come and go. But right now you can get them. I'll bet, I didn't count, but I'll bet I own 7 or 8 of this rod. Just this one model, because I have some that I fished for so many years and destroyed so bad that the action of the rod changed over time. I softened them and I had to retire them or use them for other things and get fresh ones. I fish them that much. But the reason why this is my personal favorite rod is this is one of the only rods I've ever found that can consistently throw all of the bigger soft baits and all of the bigger hard baits, and I can do it all on one rod. That is extremely difficult to find. Most of the time, you've got a rod that's really good for hard baits, really good for jig hook baits, or really good for lighter glides, but not the big glides, you know, that sort of thing. This is a rod that can just do it all. Now, it's not perfect in every situation. I throw giant glides on this rod. I mean, stuff that's double what the rating says, and I have to lob cast them, just load up and just sling them. But the reason why I do that, hear me, the reason why I do that is that it's not about my comfort casting the bait. I don't care if I have to get a little bit uncomfortable when I'm presenting a swim bait, because I know what happens when you hook a world-class fish. I know that if you put all the time into the right rod, line, bait, hook, stinger wire, all of it, and you hook a fish between 7 and 12 pounds, you're probably gonna get them. But the second you go to 13 pounds, I don't know why, I don't know how, but I've hooked enough of them to know that the second you load up on a true teener, it's like they're a different species. Something has happened to those fish. They're weird. They are stronger, they are more aggressive, they are smarter, but let me go back to the first one, they are stronger. You have never had a bass pull on you like a teener can pull on you. They pull like a saltwater fish. It is a whole different ball game. So I know that when you've done everything right, the best you're gonna do against a teener is 50-50. You're still going to lose a lot of them. They're just powerful. It's, you crack them on a big swim bait rod, and the whole game here is control, right? If you can control their head, you can control the fish, and you can land them. And you have no problem on 5, 6s, 7, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s. No problem controlling those fish. But you hook a 14 or a 15, and all of a sudden, you have no control. And the only time you'll experience that with a smaller bass, I've found that if you hang like a 8 to 11 pounder, if you accidentally gill hook them, I believe that those fish know that they're fighting for their life, because they can turn on afterburners that are mind-blowing compared to any other fish in their size class. They will just beat you down. I have had a 9-pounder pull me to my knees on the front deck of a boat because my drag was locked. But when I got her in the net, she had a hook and a gill raker. They know the difference. So these fish are capable of turning that on. And when you get into that teen class, they always turn that on. It's crazy how much stronger they are. And they're just, if you can't control them, if it becomes a one-on-one battle, a tug of war, then it's a 50-50 who the winner is. You have to have control for the odds to go your way. So the right gear will move the odds as far into your favor as possible. Because let's be real, most people watching this are not fishing for a teener. We would love to catch one, but They're not necessarily even alive in your water, right? And I understand that. So if you do this properly, you can get your odds up pushing 100% that you'll land every giant that eats. It's all about control of the fish. So going all the way back to where that little tangent started, I said that I throw these uncomfortably large baits on these softer rods. And the reason why is I don't mind being uncomfortable because I know how the rod will handle the fish when I load up on them. When I first branched into hard baits a very long time ago into treble hook baits, because I started with soft baits. When I branched into treble hook baits, I lost a lot of fish. It took me a long time to understand rod actions because the behavior was different. Again, this is the only rod that I've ever found that's got that really good crossover. Before, I had to have rods for everything. And if you want to specialize, you still need rods for everything. We're about to jump into that. But again, that one is my all-around favorite. I throw it with a Tranx 300. That's a Shimano Tranx with the power handle. Love the power handle or hate it. When you hook a monster, you'll love it. You'll understand it. The first time you hook a really big one on that reel, you will understand. When I'm grinding against a big fish on a standard swim bait handle, it's a grind. When I grind them on a power handle, I just turn a winch on. I'm just winching. It's not work. I'm dragging those fish. And the key to consistently landing swim bait fish is control. Hook them, drag them. If they come to the surface and they want to jump, break them over. What I mean is knock them down. Pull so hard that they fall over. If you can pin a fish on the surface with its mouth open, the fight is over. You can drag them all the way to the boat. But if they can come up, if you're not creating forward motion and they can come up and jump, the odds go into their favor. You've got to control that head. You've got to maintain forward movement. If a fish is taking line, if they're taking drag and swimming away from you, you are losing at an alarming rate. If you land that fish, it is a minor miracle. It can happen. Tim landed his biggest bass of his life with a fairly loose drag. He was new to swim bait fishing just like I was when I caught my 17. We were both pretty new and we both made some serious errors. Now mine was even worse. I caught mine by hand. That's its own story. We have dedicated videos to that. You could read about that on Bassmaster back in the day. It was a handline disaster. Wasn't supposed to be, it's just the way it played out. But I digress. You need control of the fish to put the odds in your favor. So that's my main rod. Other end of the spectrum, total budget rod for you, okay? But it's a budget rod that works. This reel, the Cardiff. The Cardiff, it's a round reel, 300 size reel. This is a reel that I have caught, not this particular one, this is a new one that I bought recently, but I have an old Cardiff that's just destroyed that I caught a lot of actual double digits on. It's more of a traditional style swim bait reel. This is what I grew up swim baiting on, but it's a great budget option. It'll hold a ton of line. And then I pair that to the Shimano SLX 7/8 Heavy. The 7/8 Heavy is a unique rod because on a budget, it actually does a pretty good job of both. It'll throw soft baits and hard baits. It's not perfect, but it does a really good job. If you're on a budget, that is a legitimate swim bait combo that will get it done for you and put as many odds in your favor as possible. Now, again, you don't have a power handle, so you're gonna have to pull harder on them, but you can do it. I'm going to show you a few more of my rods. One more dedicated rod here, and then I'm going to talk through some other things, because when it comes to swim bait rods, I already told you what my favorite is, right? Hands down, that's my favorite rod, and I can throw everything on it. But if you want to fine tune down a particular path, like you like throwing cover glides, we haven't got to that yet. You like throwing open water glides or wake baiting, or you like throwing jig hook baits or larger treble hook baits. All of those things, you can get a rod that's fine-tuned just for that. I told you guys in the beginning I throw a Magdraft a ton. This is a Shimano Zodius okay? This is the 7.9 Extra Heavy. This thing is a pool cue, but it's got a slightly shorter handle. It's very comfortable for making tight casts. This is my dedicated rod for throwing the 8-inch Magdraft. That is what I throw that bait on. Now I can throw it on the other one just fine, but I like to throw the Magdraft so much that I have 2 of these just for that bait. It also works remarkably well with the JSJ and any of those small to medium size jig hook baits. The reason why it works so well with a Magdraft, which is a treble hook bait, as well as the jig hook baits, is that the Magdraft has a very large treble. By the way, this is one that I like to upgrade. I fish the stock hook, it's fine, but as soon as it starts to get dull at all, I switch it. And actually, this one has been switched. This is it. But I use an Owner ST36 2-aught. That's what I put on my 8-inch Magdrafts. This is such a major part of my fishing that I have completely dedicated gear just for that bait, and stacks of these treble hooks just for that bait. And we'll get more into hooks as we get into the hard baits, because I use different hooks, different sizes for different baits, and I'll walk you through all of that. But that is what I use that rod for. And that brings us to more specialty type things. So there's rods like that Loomis that can sort of do it all, right? And they do a remarkable job of all of it, but it's not perfect for every last little situation. Here's a couple. This is from Daiwa. Okay, this is their DX swim bait. It's the 8-foot medium heavy. Very soft tip section on this rod, okay? Soft tip, soft mid. This is a really good rod for, there's sort of this emerging category. It seems like a lot of the newer baits that are coming out in the glide bait world are those mid-size, like 6 to 8 inch glides. This rod is really good for being accurate with that size class of bait. So you want to take, you know, like a Spro Chad Shad or a Chimera Shad on the upper end. Some of those different baits, or some of your Bluegill options. They're dedicated swim baits, but they're not giant swim baits. They don't have 2-aught treble hooks. They've got size 2, size 1, up to like 1-aught trebles. And you want to be able to cast them comfortably. Maybe you like throwing them on lighter line. Again, I'm still braid to leader, but maybe you like throwing them on 17 to 20 pound mono or fluoro because you're crazy. Just kidding. You can do all of that on that rod. I've got that paired up to Alexa HD, which of course has the power handle on it as well. But again, I want to, let me take just a second to go back to line, and then we've got, let's finish rods, then I'll go to line, because otherwise we're going to go down too many rabbit holes in a row. Next one from St. Croix in the Victory series. This is the 710 Heavy. They call that the SB Ranger, Swimbait Ranger. This rod is super lightweight. I've got it paired to that same Tranx 300. Firmer tip, softer mid, okay? This works really, really well for all my mid-size to larger glides, but it shines with my wake baits. So those mid to upper sized hard baits. The reason why I like this rod so much, because it wouldn't be here if there wasn't a standout reason, right? My accuracy with this rod is shocking. So usually when we're swim baiting, we're just lob casting. Remember back in the beginning of this video when I said swim baiting was easy before we went down 42 rabbit holes together? I still maintain that it is easy. You could take 1 or 2 of these baits, get you a rod, go fishing, you're gonna be fine. You really are most of the time. But right now, I'm helping you dial in the fine details to actually land the biggest fish of your life when she actually bites, because now you understand how to do it. That's why we're complicating it. But most of the time, we're just lobbing these big baits. roll up, fire them out there, splash, start slow rolling. The fish come to it because it has drawing power. That's the key to a swim bait, the ability to pull fish across distance, to draw them. That's what makes it special. Because of that, we don't have to be accurate. But when we start talking about wake baiting, where we want to get right up against shore, maybe we want to get right up on a retaining wall, or we want to take a mid-size glide or a Magdraft and we want to get way up under a dock, and we've got to be exact because it's low to the water. This SB Ranger is the most accurate rod that I own. And I've never pinpointed, I mean, I know that it's in the action. It's in that firmer tip meeting softer mid. It just loads up in such a way that it can be extremely accurate. Because usually with a swim bait rod, you're like, it's a 10-foot circle. I want to land by that dock, and you land over by that dock. But with this rod, I can put it between the second and third piling and skip it back in there. Or I could take that wake bait and lay it right down the edge of that dock, feather it in there, and land 2 inches from the piling. I have a very high rate of accuracy with this rod. And then last but not least is a rod that is not a swim bait rod whatsoever, but it is by far my favorite rod for throwing the burrito. Particularly the 5-inch burrito. It will throw the 6 inches well. Works extremely well when I want to throw that jig hooked version of the Magdraft. Works extremely well with some of my bluegill baits. This is from Shimano in the X Pride line. This is the 7.7 Heavy. The 7.7 Heavy is a jig style rod, firm tip, but very moderate mid. Not like a crankbait rod moderate, right? But it's just more moderate than like a true pool cue, like flip and stick type rod. Because it's so moderate in the mid, it does an amazing job of pinning a jig hook. And then when I start grinding those fish, I can load it deep enough through that moderate mid that if they come up and try to jump, I've got enough rod bowed up on them that they can't unload it and get that bait out of their mouth. It's just a perfect balance. So that, again, like a Magdraft, the burrito is a bait that I throw so much that I have taken the time to dial in a perfect rod for just that bait. That X Pride 7.7 Heavy is incredible. I throw that paired up to a Bantam, 65-pound braid, 20-pound leader, call it a day. It's just an unbelievable dream combo for throwing that thing. And of course, it's a jig rod, so it has amazing crossover. It's one of my favorite rods for throwing A-rigs, one of my favorite rods for throwing bigger jigs, big, heavy Texas rigs, stuff like that. Great crossover there. All right, let's talk line, okay? I've already alluded to that whole argument that goes on online all the time. I typically use 65 to 80-pound braid. This is Suffix 832. There's about 15 different kinds of braids I've used through the years. I probably still have 5 or 6 kinds tied on at any one time, but 832 more and more has become my most consistent option because I like how well it takes a knot even when it's brand new braid. A lot of braids, you kind of have to break them in before they take a knot really well. And I just like how I can take brand new braid and get a really good knot every time out of that 832. I almost always use 80-pound for all of my dedicated big bait rods. Occasionally I'll use 65, but usually 80. The people who hate fishing swim baits on braid are people that don't understand braid, they don't understand the ratings, and they've used too light a braid, right? Because the biggest argument is people that cast baits off. And they're like, I lost a $100 bait, I lost a $300 bait, I'll never use braid again. I get it. But as somebody who guided for years, guiding swim bait anglers or guiding people who don't swim bait, teaching them how to swim bait and putting them on swim bait bites, if all of those people through all of those years never cast off one of my expensive baits, then obviously there's a way to do it. Because I'm talking guys who'd never thrown a swim bait in their life would get on my boat, I'd teach them the concept, and I'd take them out swim bait fishing, 80-pound braid, and they would never, despite horrible backlashes every day, would never break off my stuff. You need much heavier braid than the rating would suggest, right? You don't need 80-pound braid to fight a 7-pound bass. You don't even need 80-pound braid to fight an 18-pound bass. You need 80-pound braid because when you are casting a super heavy bait, there's an incredible amount of force as that bait is flying through the air. And if you backlash 30, 40, 50-pound braid, braid to braid, shock factor will cut each other and you'll cast your bait off. If you go to 65, it'll stop happening. If you go to 80, it will never even be a thought in the back of your mind. It's never going to happen. The braid will never break on a cast. It's just bulletproof at that point. And I like bulletproof. I like things that just, you can do it all wrong and it still works. Because again, we don't know when the fish of a lifetime is going to take its shot. Now, I know 80-pound braid sounds crazy to most people, but we're using 300 plus size reels. You can hold tons of it. 80-pound braid is still very thin and it's very manageable. It's not like fluoro. 80-pound braid is still easier to use than 25-pound fluoro. From there, I tie on leaders. Okay, and I grabbed 3. If I'm throwing wake baits, I use this. This is from Sunline. In their System Shock, this is their nylon mono. And I typically use 30-pound. You can go even heavier. You can go to like 40-pound. Now, hear me out. As I say that, somebody just gagged and was like, I'm done listening to this guy. Sunline is a JDM line. JDM lines have their true ratings, not US fake ratings, okay? So like a 30-pound JDM line may be smaller than the 20-pound American mono that you're using today. You need to realize that. The diameters are night and day different. It's because that 20-pound American mono you're using actually breaks at 35 pounds. So they're just telling the truth about the rating. So I often blow people away that I use a lot of 30 to 35-pound leader, and they think I'm nuts, but they don't realize that if they actually went and got the lines tested, if they actually went and shocked and broke them, or we measured them, my line is both thinner and weaker than their line. So they just don't know that they're overpowering. I at least know the difference, right? So 30-pound is my main gig, but again, it's so thin, you can go to 40, especially on a topwater. Dude, you can throw it for the rest of your life, you're never gonna break it. It's just eliminating the problem. The next one, this is one of the main lines I use. Sunline, they have 2 shock leader fluoros. And more I've been shifting all my attention to, I don't even know how you say that, tuna jeet or something like that. It's the more expensive one, but I really like its actual shock absorbing, particularly on the cast. I've had no issues with this stuff. You pay for it. It's pricey line. All of my giant baits I throw on 35-pound. My mid-size baits, like 8-inch baits, I'll throw on either 30 or 35. And then the small stuff I typically throw on 20 to 25. Usually 25. But my main thing, like just day in and day out, you ask me, what do you throw a swim bait on? It's 80-pound braid tied to 35-pound shock leader. That's what I use. And then the last one from Seaguar, this is their gold label. Again, it's a JDM line. It's extremely thin. This line, this is 30-pound. This is what I use. Like, I don't tournament fish anymore, but if I had a tournament, I would drop to this. So like if I did my pre-fish on 35-pound, when it came to game day, I'd go to 30 trying to get more bites, because this 30 is thin stuff. This is probably thinner than what you're already using, even though I sound crazy saying 30. Try to understand that. It's extremely thin line. So if I've got really clear water, or if I really want to get a bite, you know, I'm just trying to get bit, I'll drop to that lighter 30-pound gold label, and I've had amazing results with that stuff. And then as far as tying these things together, because you just discovered that I use leaders on all of my braid. Even on wake baits, I don't throw them on straight braid. I always want a shock absorber in there. The main knot that I use is a modified blood knot, a 9-loop blood knot. So 9 loops one way, 9 loops the other way, cross back through center, get it wet, pull it tight. Again, we have dedicated videos to how to do that, that you can go find and watch. But that is my main gig. It is not the strongest knot in the world. I'll say that right out the gate. I want you to understand, it's not. There are stronger knots. There are plenty of people who want to argue online about this knot or that knot. They love the FG or whatever. I'm not tying that knot because I don't know how to tie others. In fact, let me show you what's on here, because this particular rod was doing some inshore fishing with me just the other day. When I'm inshore fishing and I'm tying my braid to 80-pound line, I'm tying the PR knot, okay? It's not that we don't know how to tie technical knots. It's that in bass fishing, speed and consistency are key, because the knot is strong enough. That is not going to be my failure point. I'm never going to break my connection knot. When I go from 80-pound braid to 35-pound fluoro on a shock leader, my 9-loop blood knot will not be my failure point, period. I don't need a stronger knot. What I need is a knot like a blood knot that when I tie it and I snug it up, I can look at it and I can visually see that the knot is perfect every single time. I can see it with my eyes. And that's why that became critical for me as a guide, because I would have a lot of clients come on the boat that tied FGs, they tied crazy Albertos, they tied all these knots that on paper are a superior knot. But in reality, there was no way for them to know that it was tied right or wrong until it was under load. And they would lose these big fish, and it would be a connection knot failure, their connection knot. I would grab their lines, tie an inferior, in theory, modified blood knot, see that it's right, and the issues are over. So it got to where if you got on my boat, I clipped all your leaders and made my connection so that I could watch them, because it really makes a difference. So when I'm throwing swim baits, that's what I'm throwing. Now, when I'm in other situations, I use other knots. I'll admit that right away. But these fish, teener or not, will never stress my connection knot enough to make a difference. I will always use that 9-loop blood knot. Whew. I told you that was going to be a tangent. I'm really glad you stuck around for it. We've got some more baits to talk through now, and then storage as well. And actually, let's just get storage out of the way super quick here before we get into all those hard baits, which is what the majority of people want to know about anyway. Sorry, we've pushed it all the way to the end, but storing swim baits is its own bear, right? There's a lot of ways to do it. The way that I like to do it, if I'm just like grab and go, I Surrender makes these bags that you can roll open. You just fold them up, throw them in the boat, throw them in a backpack, and you're good to go. This is the biggest one. They make them with less pouches as well. It's a great way to go. These Serpas, have you seen these by Spro? These came out last year. These things are awesome. You just squeeze it. It just becomes a little tube. Take your bait, hard bait or soft bait, slide it in there, and then just let it close. And now, let me get centered up. Right? It's in there. It's done. It's such a simple concept, and it works so well, and they're super durable. Your hooks won't come through them. These things are awesome. And then just squeeze, out comes your bait. This is genius. Like for quick grab in a backpack or even in the edges of your boat somewhere, these are great. And they come in 3 sizes, so you can get the appropriate size for your given bait. The Lakewood box, which this box is empty at the moment because every bait that was in it is currently out on the deck. But the Lakewood box is a vertical box. And I like these for my really big baits, right? Like this size bait, where I can hang them inside here, and they hang on these hook hangers. They hang and they're perfectly straight. And it comes with room to hold 8 baits inside of this box. And they sit upright, hanging, so I never have bent tails or any issues at all. Some of my more sensitive custom glides, stuff like that, I like to hang in these boxes. But the #1 way that I store my baits is I get these Plano tubs that have no dividers. I better close the lid. They have no dividers. This one's, what's it labeled? Shad Glide, right? And I just pile them in there, but I make sure that as I pile them in, they're laying flat. None of them have a curved tail. They're laying flat. And then I always store this bait. I'll have to redo it now that I stood it up to show it to you. But I always put them in my boat flat. I don't put them in on edge. And this keeps my baits in good enough day in, day out. This works great. I mean, every bait in there has a straight tail. They're ready to rock. None of them are kinked up, right? They're good. No problems at all. That is the main way that I store. And I mean, I have changed through the years. I used to store in cardboard boxes and bags and you name it. From super high end to just absolute trash, I've done it all. This is the way that I store the majority of my baits today. And then one other thing before we take that deep dive is getting your baits back out, because these are expensive baits. You don't want to lose them. I have lost countless thousands of dollars to snags. People don't realize how much, well, maybe some people do, how much money you can blow on swim baits. But Tim and I, for years, we had this bite throwing Huddlestons. It was an unbelievable bite. We were on this night bite, and again, it lasted for years. But we were fishing this horrible lava rock. Even with retrievers, there was just no way around it. We lost on average 3 baits per guy per day. It was actually per night, but it was 3 baits a guy a night. You're talking $100 in HUDs every time you went out per guy. Horrible. So you want to do everything you can to get your baits back. There's 2 lure retriever styles I use. If it's shallow, I love this style. This is from Fraybill. So this, we can extend. We open these up. Each section will open and extend. We can run this thing out to 15 feet long. And what you do is you take your line and you just curl it around the line and you wrap until the line is all the way down the center and it goes through. And then you just slide it down the line and you can bang your bait free. And if you get right down onto the head of the lure and you can't get it out, you can continue to twist around the head of a lure until you get down to that hook and you can knock it right out. That works great. Its only limitation is that it extends to 15 foot. So after you stick your arm in the water a couple more feet, that's as far as she's going. If you're fishing deep, you're on your own. This guy, for years, I've had bulldog or hound dogs made. I have a buddy that made me the best hound dog I've ever had. I was amazed a couple years ago when I saw this toothy Fishman retriever start popping up, because it was almost identical to the custom hound dog that I was having built. So I bought some of these. These are the XL size. The biggest one he makes is the one that you want for big swim baits, because the more weight that you have, the harder it will hit and the better it will push it back and get it out and get it free. I keep this just on a giant old bulk spool, and I tie mine to heavy rope. I'm not messing around. So you send this thing down the line, you thread your line through it, you send it down the line, and this giant hunk of lead will go down there and just punch your bait in the face and it'll knock it backwards and get it out. In the case of a treble hooked bait, if it's really snagged, you just sit there and you bang on it until the chains get into the hooks, and then that's why I have it on such a heavy rope. You just start pulling until you bend the hooks, wind that thing up, and now all you have to do is change the hooks. You didn't lose your $100, $200, $300 bait. If you're gonna get serious about swim baiting, invest in some kind of retriever, because you will want it. You know, the retriever itself is gonna cost you a little bit of money, but you literally get your money back the first time that it gets a bait out. I've got retrievers that have saved me tens of thousands of dollars, single retriever. And I've only lost 2 or 3 retrievers through the years. Every once in a while, you'll find yourself a snag so bad that you lose your bait and your retriever. You get them both cut off. That's as bad as it gets. But seriously, a retriever will save you a small fortune, or maybe a large fortune, depending on how often you swim bait. Okay, let's take the deep dive. Let's talk about hard baits and we'll wrap it up there. Kicking this category off, let's start with the bluegill baits. There's only 4 of them. They'll go really quickly. So we'll go bluegill baits, then we'll go open water glide baits, cover glides, gizzard glides is sort of their own offshoot, then multi-joints, and we'll end with topwater. And then maybe if I haven't completely lost my voice by then, we'll even talk smallmouth baits for just a second. Bluegill baits, these are in no particular order. Ooh, it's starting to drizzle again. Hopefully it passes. It's passed a couple of times. It hasn't started dumping on us yet. We've done really good. We will see. When it comes to bluegill baits, no particular order, but we'll talk about the Gantarelle first because we already talked about it in the beginning, so we don't have to go way down that rabbit hole. The Gantarelle functions a lot like a glide, but instead of being twitchy and aggressive, we do the opposite. So the Gantarelle is on one hand, where the Bait Sanity Explorer Gill is on the other. This is hands down my favorite bluegill glide. I really like this bait. And when this color came out, because this female bluegill was not one of the original colors that they released. When this color came out, I fell in love with this thing. I love that like lit up look. I like that in a lot of baits. Like you guys know how much we like that original river to sea light trout, right? It's just a lit up bright bait. I love that in a gill profile. It's such a good look. There's just something about that that just catches fish. That glide is very consistent. You can fish it methodically and just get that beautiful swim out of it. It comes with a split ring on the nose. I leave that. Well, actually, I upgrade it, but I keep a split ring. Typically, if a bait comes with one, I use one. If it comes without one, I don't use one because the designer had something in mind. Now, there are baits that I tweak and modify and do all my own things, but that's typically where I'm at. So I keep a split ring on this bait. That allows that good fluid flow, but you can get super twitchy and it'll just pop, 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 pop. Get super aggressive as well. Historically, I would not use bluegill glide baits. I didn't like any of them. I would take baits like a River to Sea S-Waver 168 and I would use a bluegill color. And I still do that a lot. But the reason why is that bluegill profiles historically are very hard for bass to eat. Well, in the real world, they're hard for bass to eat, right? The number one thing that you will see a bass choking on and dying out on a lake is either like a bluegill or a tilapia. Those are what they choke on. It's a difficult profile for them to eat in the real world. So it stands to reason that when you're imitating it, it is a difficult profile for them to eat. So a lot of the baits that came out in the beginnings were very tall. They had big fins, just like a real bluegill. Hookup ratios were terrible. The fish would just bounce off of them. This bait in particular is perfect. Notice no fins on the bottom. And then on the top, it's a tiny fin, but it still gives a true bluegill vibe. And that's what I'm looking for. You'll notice the same thing with a Gantarelle. While a Gantarelle has fuller fins, it's not tall. It's a slim gill. If you took an actual bluegill of this length, the bluegill would be significantly taller. It's these slimmer baits that are easier to eat that have really opened the doors for bluegill imitators for me in the past few years. So these two baits are a 1-2 punch. By the way, I fish these. I upgrade hooks on most things that I throw. And on these treble hooked baits, I'll tell you. So on the Gantarelle, this is a size 1. This is a size 2. That's what I like to fish it with. These are 3X trebles. So the two main hooks that I use are an Owner ST36, which is a 1X treble, and then an Owner ST56, which is a 3X treble, much stronger wire. Those are the two main hooks that I use on all of my hard baits. I've used a lot of hooks through the years. There's one in between these. There's a 2X where the points are tipped in. That's not for me. I want my points out there straight. I like needle points, and I like them out where they're gonna catch. I don't want a curved point. Curved points, if you like your baits to be beautiful, curved points won't rub your paint job near as bad, and the paint job on your bait will last much longer. But if you want to hang your bites, if you want to stick every one of those fish using straighter points, good needle point hooks will do a better job of that. So on this one, I like a size 1 and a size 2. And on this one, I use a 2 and a 2. Those are what I prefer on these baits. I like the way they fish, and I like the way that they hook up. But these two baits are a 1-2 punch. The bait Sanity, I can be very twitchy, snapping that reel, popping it, very aggressive, getting that bait to walk in place or to glide and then dart, much like an S-waver. Be very aggressive, very erratic, whereas the Gantarelle is the slower wander. The complete opposites, but fishing for the same fish. And depending on the mood of the fish, I'll use one or the other to my advantage. Two other baits in this category. From Buka, we've got the Bluegill. And the Bluegill is a burner. This is as fast as you can turn the handle. And I like to burn, pause, burn, pause, burn, pause. This bait will start and stop. Burn, 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 pause, burn, 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 pause, burn, pause. That super aggressive works so well around shallow vegetation when fish are hunting. Like if I'm working grass edges and I'm actually seeing fish blow up occasionally in the grass, like wishing I had a frog rod with me, that's when this bait shines, because I can burn on those edges and get those fish to shoot out and react to that thing. I do upgrade my hooks on this. I use Owner ST36s, so the 1X hooks. I actually go to a 1/0 in the front, and I go to a size 2 in the back. That hook is way oversized, and they can snag each other. But this is a bait, because of how fast I fish it, because I'm so aggressive with it, that a lot of times when the fish eat it, I'm out of position. And that larger 1X hook does a really good job of hooking those fish up, even if I kind of blow my hook set. Because I'm working and popping and twitching and going all crazy, and then all of a sudden there's a fish on it, and they hit it so hard because they're hunting it and chasing after it. The bites are always explosive, and sometimes I'm not ready, and that 1X hook just lets me like, oh, I got him, good. It just helps me hook them up. So that's why I have such an oversized 1X on the front. And then last, but certainly not least, we've got a crazy little bait that really isn't even a swim bait. I've talked about it before. You guys have heard us talk about it through the years. This is a Megabass Battalion. It's more of a lipless crankbait than anything. It's loud as can be. Super obnoxious. But it fits into this category. Very similar to that Buka. This is a bait that I like to run pretty quick, but I like to run it fast and then stop it, kind of like the Gantarelle, but a lot faster. So it'll, and then it cuts out. That's how I like to fish this thing. I have done unbelievably well with this bait around bluegill eaters. I've even done well with this bait on smallmouth. I have done incredibly well with this bait in South America on other species. You know, giant peacock bass losing their minds on this thing. I've used it literally all over the globe. It's an amazing bait for drawing fish in stained water. So if you've got stain to mud, the Battalion with that racket, you can be so aggressive, but because you can start and stop, you can do it in short spaces. So like I could throw it right up to a retaining wall and only burn it a foot and then pause, and I'm still well within their strike zone, and I've pulled fish to it, and I can get them to commit. So I can fish it in very small areas, very pinpoint, or I can use it to cover flats and cover a lot of water as well. All right, I'm gonna pause really quick. I've gotta clean the lens. I can see water drops on the lens. Hopefully this knocks it off and we can wrap this video up. We don't have too far yet to go. All right, let's jump in to glide baits. Now, glide baits, years ago, Tim and I divided glide baits into two categories, and that had never been done before. We started referring to open water glide baits and cover glides. And those have now become well-known categories, but we just sort of invented that one day to explain the differences between them, and that has caught on. So first, let's talk about open water baits. Typically, open water baits are what we're going to fish for trout and kokanee eaters, or for fish that are running large gizzard shad in open water, or any fish that, you know, summertime, they like to get out off the bank. Open water glides work remarkably well in exactly that, open water, where we're fishing over the tops of fish and we need to call them up to the bait. Okay, so these are baits that have larger swims. So if you're on a western reservoir that's got trout or kokanee in it, these are phenomenal options. If you are targeting giant striper, these can be amazing options. If you're targeting spotted bass or largemouth, but you're in a lake that's really clear in the southeast, and you want a herring lake, but these fish are suspending and you need to pull them, larger open water glides are where you want to invest your time. Because these baits have a wider, slower swim, they're covering more distance without moving as far forward. A tight action bait is coming at you quick. These are covering a lot of ground without coming closer to the boat or to the bank. And that gives open water fish more time to rise to the bait. So a lot more drawing power. If you take a really tight action bait and burn it on the surface in 60 feet of water and the fish are 20 feet down, they don't catch up to it before it arrives at the boat. You go to a slow open water glide and they have time to get there. So in this category, today I've only got 3 baits in this category. Of course there are others, but these are the key baits that I throw. The first one is the slide swimmer, which of the 3 is the bait I spend the least amount of time with. But the slide swimmer, I've left it out of some videos in the past because I have so much more confidence in the others. But the slide swimmer, I mean, it has a time and a place. It's a remarkable bait that's made by Depths. That's the Slide Swimmer 250. That bait has proven itself. It's got a soft skin on it. Through the years, there's been some different versions, but it's just got an amazing slow swim to it. You can glide it and it'll kick out and do these beautiful cuts when you do those reel pops. So you can do that slow, just like we talked about the S-Waver 168 in the beginning, but on a grander scale. Slow, methodical, and then twitch, twitch, and then bring it back in. Very consistent bait that works remarkably well and has proven itself. This next one, though, is where I'm going to spend the majority of my time. From Bait Sanity, this is the Explorer. This trout glide is an amazing bait. This particular bait, this is their TW Steelhead color. This is a Tackle Warehouse exclusive color. The steelhead color is super natural looking compared to the standard trout color, although the biggest fish I ever caught was on just the plain trout color. But just amazing bait. So the reason why I like this glide so much is that open water glides as a whole tend to be shockingly expensive. Almost all of them are custom baits. This and a slide swimmer and an S-Waver are about it for the baits that aren't going to cost you a fortune. Oh, we got to back up in a second. I forgot to talk hooks on both of those. But the Explorer by Bait Sanity really brought affordability to a category that had never had affordability before. This bait is amazing. And it's been really fun to watch because the category has changed. So when I first latched onto this bait, caught a bunch of big largemouth on it, and then I got on a bite on incredible stripers back in California on that bait, catching giant river fish. Just truly an amazing fish catching bait. The only complaint that people had about it was my favorite part, which was it was a slightly faster sink. So I would take this to the mountain reservoirs, Don Pedro, New Malones, some of those others up there, down to Comanche, you know, some of those lakes, and just blast fish, because I could fish it up high, just below the surface, or I could count it down. I could fish it over humps, over rock piles, off the end of long tapering points to pull fish from deeper water. And I would get those spots and those largemouth that you couldn't get on other baits because you could not reach them. And it's been humorous to me now, because with the advancements in forward-facing sonar, now there's a bunch of swim baiters that use forward-facing to throw glide baits. They count them down. And now you're watching videos online of guys wrapping lead around the shanks of hooks to pull the baits down faster, taking all these custom baits and trying to make them sink faster. And if we went back 5 or 10 years, the biggest complaint guys had about factory baits, ABS baits, is that they tended to sink faster. They wanted custom baits that hung just ultra slow sink, almost suspending baits is what they wanted to fish. Now these guys want fast sinking baits, and now they're trying to figure out how to modify all of these. Whew, we got a big gust of wind coming. They're trying to modify all of these same custom baits, whereas a lot of these stock baits have those perfect sink rates already and always did. But they've just been a little slower to adapt. So one thing I'll say to that, if you are using glides with live, I do not wrap the shanks of my hook. I think that is a terrible idea. It works, it adds a lot of weight, and it will get your baits down, but you don't want to alter your hook gap. You want to leave that in place. So I will use suspend strips, and I will use a lot of them if I need to. In fact, there's an old one right there on the nose of a slide swimmer. That thing's been on there forever. I'll use suspend strips to change baits. Like if a bait, that particular slide swimmer had some nose rise to it, and a little bit of suspend strip will just pull that nose down just a little, and now she's a flat glider. But you can use suspend strips spread here and here, and then every once in a while I'll add them right here as well. But I can use that to get down, and that doesn't impede my hookup ratio. Keep that in mind. At the end of the day, it's about hooking and landing these fish. Don't do anything that will screw up that hookup to land ratio. But back on subject, back to these baits. They work unbelievably well in open water, and the Explorer does it on a budget. That is by far the best bang for the buck for an open water bait that I've ever found on the market. When I upgrade hooks on this bait, I use the Owner ST36, and I like to use a 2-aught and a 2-aught, or a 2-aught and a 1-aught. And that's what I use on that bait. Back to the slide swimmer, I use the Owner ST56, so the 3X hook, and I use those in a 1-aught and a 1-aught. That's what I like on that bait. I like the added weight to help control that bait, because that bait, they're not all the same. Some of them are a little squirrelier than others. That little bit of extra weight there and that little bit of extra weight on the face helps stabilize that bait. And then I forgot, back to that Battalion, stock hooks on a Battalion are not my favorite. I upgrade them immediately out of the pack. I go to the ST56 2 and 2. That's what I fish on a Battalion. And then last but not least, that brings us to the S-Waver. The S-Waver 200, my original open water glide bait. The amount of damage that Tim and I did on this bait when it first came out and for many years to follow, I mean, never to be done again. It was unbelievable the way we caught giants on this thing. This bait is just so consistent, and to this day, if a guy wants to get in on a budget, a Waver 200 is an unbelievable bait. You can suspend strip it, and it's perfect for live fishing. You can fish it stock, it's perfect for shallow fishing. You can change hooks to change the action, but it's large enough to get giant bites. I've caught actual double digits on that bait, but it's small enough to catch small fish too. It's such a fun bait. Both the S-Waver 168 and the 200 are just remarkable baits. As far as hooks go, These are not my hooks. These are on here because I was throwing this bait for striper. So they're upgraded. That is not what I would put on here. The S-Waver comes stock with 1X 2-aughts. A 2-aught and a 2-aught is what it comes stock with out of the box. I actually ditch those and I go to an ST36, so the 1X, and I go to a 1-aught and a 1-aught. And I found that my hookup ratio is better. My theory, because normally a bigger hook will have a better hookup ratio. This bait is so thin top to bottom, and a lot of fish will headshot it. A lot of them. You're slow rolling that bait, twitch, twitch. The S-Waver 168, I twitch it quick, right? Pop, pop. The 200 is more of a twitch, twitch, because it's a wider swim to start with. And then when I want it to glide, I want to glide, glide. It's less than an explorer or a slide swimmer, but it's more than a cover glide. Because of that, a lot of the fish, when it turns, they headshot the bait. And I think that the 2-aught hook, I just heard a big old blow up somewhere, but I didn't see it. That 2-aught hook, I think, hangs farther. This is a 1-aught, but this is a 3X. So the 2-aught hangs even farther down, and I think that it's below their chin when they headshot it. And sometimes they'll headshot it and then spit it out, and the hook never even touches. But when I go to the 1-aught and they headshot it, it's right there, touching that chin, and they skin hook. And we have underwater footage of fish that'll come in and just get one little hook point on an S-Waver, and then when they thrash, the other hook comes around and gets them, and now they've got a face full. They've got it T-boned, but it started with just one little hook point until they shook their head and brought it around. It's really interesting. So in the case of this bait, because it is so much thinner, I really think that that smaller hook has a better hookup ratio. All right, we're going to shift over to cover glides. Now, as the name suggests, open water glides are for open water. Cover water glides are for fishing in and around cover. Cover can be grass beds. Cover can be docks. I point at a dock that you guys can't see off camera. It can be laid down trees. It could be bridge pilings. It could be stumps, boulders. It could be anything. It's just anywhere that you can see a target that you believe a fish might be next to, and you can cast past that target and then come to it. So these big open water glide baits, the ones that I gave you, those three, all three of those can be twitched and worked to get extra action out of them. But the majority of open water glide baits, a lot of the custom baits on the market, they can't be twitched and worked. You just slow roll them and hope for the best. If you try to twitch them, they blow out, they roll, they get messed up. That's why I focused on these three. With cover glides, it's all about twitching and working. So with a cover glide, my goal is to identify a piece of cover. Now, I might do this 200 times before I have a fish eat it, but I'm engaged all the time. I see a little corner of a grass clump. I see a stump. I see a stick. I see the tip of a dock, whatever it is. I'm gonna put my hood up. I will bet you, despite the cloud cover and the drizzle, I'm gonna get a heck of a sunburn because we've been out here so long. So I'm gonna cover up. But the cover glides, I'll pull them over here. What I like to do is throw them past my target, then intentionally wind them. The way I talked about the S-Waver earlier, slow, methodical reeling, natural swim. Then when I get near my target, twitch, twitch to cause and draw a reaction strike from the fish. So fire beyond your target, throw past the dock, slow wind the whole way, never make a twitch, all the way up to the dock, and then right as I'm passing the corner piling, the place I think a fish would be, I stay consistent, I pass the piling, and in my mind, what I'm after is if there's a fish on the piling, as I've passed it, she'll make her rise. She'll come out of her hiding place to have her look at it. And that is when I make my twitches and I try to draw a reaction. So we're using these baits to actively target fish around visible cover and draw fish out and then get them to react. This is a very unique style of fishing. This is not swim bait basics. This is advanced swim baiting, but it is also very easy to do. You can master it in a day. I have had countless clients go out with me and master it in a day. It is not complicated. You just need to see it done, or now here we are talking to each other today, and I'll explain to you how to do it so that you can replicate it. It works remarkably well. Just a handful of baits in this category. One more there. The first one, this is from Magdraft. This is called the Jointed Claw. This is a 178, okay? This is the bait that I throw the least out of this bunch. But the Magdraft Jointed Claw was the original, you may not know this, the original glide bait to come into the US. The claw is what caused this entire thing. That was the first Japanese bait to ever come over. And to this day, if you want to spend some money on a cover glide and you want a bait that is very consistent, has amazing paint jobs, amazing color schemes, that Jointed Claw is a phenomenal bait. I love that 178 size. I like the Magnum too, but the 178 in particular, that is the bait. It is just the more refined version of most of these other baits, but that's an amazing option. I fish it with a size 2 and a size 2. Just a great bait. Next up is that River to Sea S-Waver 168. The S-Waver 168 was the original US glide. That was the first glide bait built here in the States. They've been around for a really long time. We talked a lot about this bait at the beginning of the video, so I don't need to take a deep dive here. We've already talked about how to fish it, what to do with it, but the Waver is an unbelievable bait. It's not particularly large, none of these are, but they have great drawing power, and you can draw that core response from a fish that is up around shallow cover. You can pull them out and get them to attack. You can still throw all these baits in open water. You can still throw them for suspended fish. They just don't pull fish as far as the bigger baits do. If you're throwing the giant baits and fish come up but they'll never eat them, go to a cover glide. They may come up and attack them. But sometimes you need one bait to pull them and another bait to catch them. It just depends. But that S-Waver 168 through the years, coast to coast, top to bottom, has been the most consistent glide bait that I have ever thrown. And we throw it in some off-the-wall colors. As you guys know, light trout is the one that we did the most damage with through the years, followed by Bluegill, followed by the Warden, or Warden Hitch. That's that one there. Just very consistent colors. There are some TW exclusive colors now that are unbelievable. It's what I throw out here on the TVA system. Just amazing colors. Again, with all these baits, we'll link all that stuff in the video description. With the Waver, same thing, owner ST56, so the 3X hooks, size 2, front and back. I take the stock terminal off. The stock terminal is actually thicker than this. It's like 3X to 4X hardware. And I take it off and go to these because I like the action of the bait better with that owner 3X on it. Next one from Savage Gear. This is their little guy. And this bait, this was a bait that I had clients bring on my boat and catch fish like head to head with an S-Waver. But for years, I didn't use it. It just flew under my radar. And last year, I got back into it, actually, not even in this size, and the size smaller, the little one, because I don't throw the tiny S-Waver. But I got into the tiny Savage, that little swimmer, worked unbelievably well on smallmouth in the north. And then I started throwing the bigger size as well. And I had a lot of fish caught on this bait through the years from guys bringing it on my boat, but it just never connected with me until recently. And it's not a new bait at all, but it's got some super fishy colors. It fishes very similar to the S-Waver or to the Magdraft. Very, very similar bait, and it works really well. And again, will not break the bank. That's the biggest thing with these cover glides, is with the exception of the Gancraft, they're very inexpensive baits. Next up is this little guy, and this one is just now coming to market. Again, this is a bait that we were able to get our hands on at iCast this year, and have already caught a bunch of nice fish on. I've already caught a big spotted bass on this thing, and a bunch of other fish. But this bait, so Mike Buka, who makes a bunch of these baits, has partnered up and created another brand called Buka Brand that's making ABS baits. And this is his glide under that product line. So this is an ABS Buka glide. And this little bait has been fishy. So far, I've fished it with stock hooks, and I've been very, very happy with it. But I can tell you, as soon as I go to replace them, it will be probably a size 2 and a size 4 ST56. So 3X, size 2, size 4. That's what I'll upgrade with. It comes with like EWG style hooks, which I've used, but I've got one right there that's starting to bend out. Like I said, I've caught a bunch of fish on it. But this little guy is a super, this starts crossing the line into a true shad glide. And we're about to jump into gizzard glides as their own animal. But you take this compared to like an S-Waver. The S-Waver or the Savage, these are more of your all-around baits. So like you throw it in a bluegill pattern, kind of looks like a bluegill. Throw it in a trout pattern, kind of looks like a trout. Throw it in a shaddy pattern, it's kind of a shad. They catch everything, right? But this, when we get over to this guy, that shad glide is a true shad shape, shad profile, shad colors, and it's much dartier. So this is a bait that you can slow roll it. It's got a pretty good little swim to it. But if you start twitching it and working it, it'll just snap, 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 snap. It's like very mechanical, very darty, aggressive action. And it's worked really well for me to like work it pretty quick and then give it a couple pop, 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 pop. I've done the best with this thing fishing over the top of laid down trees. Whether or not I can see fish in there. Like I've caught them out of some shallow trees where I can visibly see the fish, and then I circle around and get them. And I've caught some really big spotted bass that were suspended in trees, and I just threw out off the end of the tree and they would come out. But again, I'm fishing it a little bit faster, and then pop, 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 and getting it to really pop, 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 and those fish just erupt on that thing. I've been super, super impressed with that bait. And I'm really glad to see, because Buka makes the bigger sizes in his main product line, but I'm really glad to see an ABS bait because they're very consistent baits, very consistent action, and I really like this size as just an all-around, across the nation glide bait for fishing in and around cover, where you can get super snappy with it and get aggressive reactions in tight quarters. It also has swiveling hook hangers on it, which is an awesome upgrade as well. Super cool bait. And then last but not least in that category, from Spro, we've got the Spro Chad Shad. This bait is a even more crossover into the Gizzard-esque baits. And we're about to dive into that, so you'll understand what I mean in a minute. But historically, I have thrown a lot of trout type glides, and then I throw them in other colors to imitate other things. And it works amazingly well until you get to a true gizzard shad fishery, where they're just eating gizzard shad or gizzard shad and bluegill, but gizzard shad are their main deal. Gizzard shad have these weird movements. They're very erratic. Like they can be going slow, but then something will spook them and they just 1,000 miles an hour, just, they're out of there. And if they're acting weird as a school, they're like, I don't know. They're a threadfin shad on adrenaline. I don't know. They're crazy. They just don't act like other fish. They get all twitchy and weird and they're moving around and they're ADD is what they are. They're psycho little fish, just going nuts. As a result, if you take a trout type glide and try to imitate their color with a trout action, like an open water glide, it's really not right. And you can catch fish doing it, but you never just blast them doing that. And we want to blast them. So I've spent the last few years really dialing into shad glide, and that Spro Shad is the first bait that sort of crossed over for me, where it's a bait that I can get a consistent swim out of, but I can also dance it and it gets really choppy. You heard us use that term for the first time a few years ago, referring to chopping glide baits. We were trying to figure out how to describe an action, and that is another term that has stuck in fishing. But chopping that bait, getting that really aggressive snapping motion out of that bait has a good crossover into those gizzard shad eaters, and that bait has proven itself time and time again. And then that brings us to 3 more here, as we're crossing even more into the realm of gizzard shad, and I'll put golden shiners in that same category, where their action is just getting more erratic, more crazy. Enter the Bait Sanity Chimera Shad. So this bait is amazing. You can slow roll it. This is one of my absolute favorite glide baits out of all of them. This bait, it's a Tackle Warehouse exclusive bait. So Bait Sanity and Tackle Warehouse got together and designed this bait. Oh, that Spro Shad, I fish that on stock hooks a lot, and then when it's time to upgrade, I go to a 1/0 ST36 in the front and a size 2 ST36 in the back. That bait is designed to be fished on lighter trebles, and typically on a lighter rod like the Daiwa or the St. Croix. It just behaves better on them. I spent a lot of time with it on 3X hooks and ultimately moved away from them, went back to 1X hooks. It's just, its behavior is better on those lighter trebles. Okay, back to the Chimera Shad. This has become one of my absolute favorite glide baits. It's got an amazing just swim to it. Unbelievable. So like on a medium swim, it's got this great swim. If you go to like a faster swim, it's super erratic. It's crazy, like a gizzard shad. And then you can go to twitch in it, and it's just dancing, just pop, 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 pop. Does an awesome job of imitating a true gizzard behavior. And the fish respond in kind. I have just absolutely throttled them on this thing. I immediately get rid of the stock hardware. I do change it out. Everybody's different. I like to upsize. So I replace split rings and hardware. And we haven't talked about split rings at all. I don't know if I even brought any, but there's 2 kinds of split rings that I use. Owner makes both of them. And we use a lot of hooks from a lot of people. It's not like we just use Owners. In this video, it's a lot of Owner, but Owner makes the Hyperwire split ring. The Hyperwire has been the gold standard of split rings for the last 20 years of swim bait fishing. If you didn't want to bend a split ring, that was the ring. Now, other companies have knocked it off and made other versions and done some different things, but that is the gold standard that set the rule. Then they also have, even stronger than the Hyperwire, they have another split ring, the Owner Ultra Wire. The Ultra Wire is incredible. So that's like a saltwater ring that they now make in sizes that we can bring back to freshwater. So if you've used the standard Hyperwires forever, a size 6 Hyperwire, so like this size right here, that in a size 6 is weaker than the little tiny size 3 Ultra Wire. So what that's allowed us to do is use little 3 and 4 size split rings, but they're unbelievably strong. So I'm able to suck my hardware up tighter to a lot of my baits because the rings aren't so big. I can go to way smaller rings and be even stronger. And that's really made a difference in a lot of my baits. So I really like going to those Ultra Wires. I started doing it because I was striper fishing with glide baits and I needed strength. But then when I got those small sizes, I liked what it was doing. Like we talked about that River to Sea, where I go to that 1/0 hook to bring my hook up more. So when they chin shot it, I still hook them. Going to those smaller Ultra Wire split rings does that too. It pulls those hooks up. and has made a big difference. So back to the Chimera shad, I typically go 1/0, 1/0 is what I throw. You could also go 1/0, 1 or 1/1 or 1/2. Like this is 2 and 2. So I'm going way bigger than stock, right? I'm going to 1/0 and 1/0, 2 sizes up. And I fish them typically in the 1X treble. So that owner ST36. That's been the most consistent. And then if I'm going to throw 3X, like striper fishing or stuff like that, I go to a 1 and a 1 in the 3X. But this bait has really been the bait that has driven my crossover into those true gizzard shad eaters, because they are their own animal. You need to be more aggressive, more reactive, more twitching, popping, working the reel. You want your baits dancing more for gizzard shad eaters versus slow roll with occasional snaps for trout and regular shad eaters, for lack of a better term. Gizzard is a lot more dancing, working, popping, twitching. Next one from Clutch. This is their OG. Clutch is a custom swim bait brand, but has started making their baits more available. And this one is in here today because it's a true gizzard bait. I don't particularly care for like the slow swim on the bait. It can have a good slow swim. If you go too slow, it'll die out. But where I really like that bait is the ability, and I'm talking straight stock, not tuning the bait or anything like that, straight stock. I really like to twitch and work the bait. It's got just a great, true gizzard dance. So if you hear what I'm saying, but you're a custom swim bait guy and you're just not going to buy an ABS bait for whatever reason, this is the custom bait that I would go to. It's got a true gizzard, erratic dancing action, and they respond really well to that one. Typically stock hooks on that. If I am upgrading, I stick with the 1X hooks, and it's a size 1 and a size 1. And then last but not least is actually not a hard bait at all, but I threw it in here because we're talking about the gizzard. So this is a bait by Savage Gear. This is I believe it's a Tackle Warehouse exclusive bait, although I could be mistaken, but I'm almost positive it is. And again, we'll link it in the description along with all these others. This is Savage Gear's new soft shad. And it's a shad glide, but it's a soft bait. This bait is different. Okay, this is in here. I just threw a soft bait into a hard bait category because I want to emphasize this. I have never found a bait that imitates the actual behavior of a gizzard shad better than this bait. Nothing. Like, as much as I love all those baits, actual gizzardy movement, this is the bait. Now, the slow roll of this bait is non-existent. If you try to go slow, it is dead straight in the water. It does nothing. You've got to be working it. You've got to dance it. Okay, so if you want a straight retrieve bait, you need a hard bait because they'll do both, right? You can twitch them and work them or slow roll them. But if you know that you're on a gizzard fishery and you've been looking for a bait to turn those fish, nothing is moving like your gizzards as well as that bait is. That bait is a stand-alone gizzard imitator. Again, no straight retrieve. This is all popping, working, reeling, twitching, bumping the rod, getting that thing to dance and move and be psychotic like gizzard shad are. That is the best imitator that I've found, period. And with that, we have hit the end of glide baits. And we've about hit the end of my voice, but we don't have very much further to go. I think for these last few, I'm going to speed it up. Multi-joint baits, I keep it simple. These are all baits I've talked about before. We've got the triple trout. We got the bull shad. From Shimano, we've got the Arma joint. This has by far been my smallest category through the years. Multi-joint baits are typically baits that you're fishing a lot faster, a lot more aggressive. burn, twitch, twitch, burn, twitch, burn, 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 twitch, twitch. Super fast, super aggressive, covering a lot of shallow water. That's how we fish them. This has been an expanding category for me the last few years because we live now around a lot of the blueback herring lakes, and a lot of those open water fish respond really well to this style of bait. So I've been putting more time back into them. Some of the baits are baits I've owned forever, and I'm now coming back and putting more time into them. But these three baits, the triple trout is built like a tank. Amazing crossover into saltwater and multi-species and everything else. I mean, it is just a tank. Swiveling hook hangers, just an amazing bait. There's nothing that can't be said about a bull shad that hasn't been said before. Swiveling hook hangers, the paint jobs are crazy looking. They're basic paint, but the fish plow this bait. I mean, the bait speaks for itself. The fish catches through the years on this thing are remarkable. It is just such a proven bait. I throw almost exclusively the 6-inch and the 7-inch. Those are the ones that I throw. That is by far the most consistent size for me. And then last is that Armajoint. The Armajoint is a very unique bait, very tight action bait. So it'll burn on the surface, but you can also twitch and pop and work it, and it will get very aggressive. Because look at the... No other bait's doing that, right? Nobody. That does two things. One, when you cast it, it folds in half and casts extremely well. Got a mosquito flying around me. It casts extremely well. It just folds up and goes. It doesn't do the tumbling in the air like a lot of glide baits will do. And then you can be super aggressive with it when you're working it, and they respond really well to that bait. And then Topwater is our last category. There's 4 of them, and all 4 are very different. The first one is not a surprise to you. This is the Tactical Wake. This is a bait that Tim and I designed. This is the Tactical Wake 210. And we designed this bait, as most of you already know, because there were things lacking in the entire wake bait genre. Some baits did this thing great, some baits did that thing great, but nothing did it all well. And we really felt like there was room for a bait to come in and do it all well, and to do it at a better price point, because all of the best baits were custom baits and they were very expensive. So we spent a lot of time with River to Sea designing this bait, completely custom lip shape, completely custom joint in it. Everything about it was different. It was a ground up build designed to create a bait that could go unbelievably slow on the surface, just insanely slow on the days that are slick calm, like what's behind me right now. Or it could be fished consistently on a wake where that lip is down and it's clacking, and it has the perfect, in my opinion, the perfect clack sound to it. And that tail will stay up and provide a little secondary wake as well. And it's just so fishy. And then we can also walk and chop this bait. Pop, 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 pop. And get explosive strikes from fish that are either aggressive or on days where we got a lot of wind and waves. It does all of those things unbelievably well. And we wanted it to do that. And we were able to accomplish that. I could not be prouder of how this thing turned out. It is a fairly large bait, and we did that on purpose. We knew if we built a smaller bait that many more of them would be sold. We knew that. But we weren't trying to build a bait because we wanted to sell a bait. Tim and I have no desire to be bait guys. Zero. Despite all the baits we built through the years, zero desire for any of it. We only build baits when there is something lacking in the market and fishermen are being impacted by it. If nobody will do it right, or if we feel like no one has done it right, we'll come in and fix it if no one's going to do it. So when we built the wake, we knew if we went smaller that a lot more people would buy them. It would be a mainstream bait. But I've spent a lot of time throwing wake baits, and I knew that the odds of people catching true double-digit class fish on that bait, actually breaking their PB, would go down drastically. And we were building this to build a better wake bait so that people would have a better shot at catching a true giant on top. So we went bigger than most people are comfortable with to try and force your hand a little bit so that you throw slightly larger than you're comfortable with, because we knew the exponential difference that that would make in the size of fish that you could catch. And we wanted to force your hand to catch a bigger bass. So that is what that bait is all about. It is an amazing fish catcher. And truly, it's a 70, I don't even remember. I'm drawing a blank. We've talked about too many baits today. I think they're 79 bucks, if I'm not mistaken. But this bait started out way, way over 100. And Tim and I weren't even willing to put it out at that price. And River to Sea worked for years behind the scenes to get costs down to be able to bring it to you at that price, because it will outswim just about anything on the market at a drastically reduced price. It's an amazing bait. Next one up from Spro. This is their 8-inch trout. It's a wake bait. This is the floater, but there's no lip. It's also a multi-joint. This bait, like those other multi-joints, this is a burner. I tend to use this bait more in the middle of summer and in early fall. And I burn this thing on top. Burn it and pause. Let it cut, dart, run, dart, and draw those super aggressive reaction strikes. If there's no cover in the water and the fish are chasing in open water, this thing will pull fish. It's an awesome bait. Next one from Bait Sanity. This crazy guy. This is a techie bait. There's a weight in here on a spring system, carbon fiber fins, carbon fiber tail. There's a magnet in the tail to hold that back hook up. There's a lot going on here. And none of it jumps out at you. It's hard to know what on earth this is about. This is a glide bait and a topwater bait. So if you fish it fast, you can actually speed it up and fish it like a regular glide. And it has a beautiful wide glide to it. But that's not where this bait shines for me. Where it shines for me is when I slow it down and I walk it like a topwater walk the dog bait. And when I say topwater, it's only half topwater. So this is like a spook type bait to me, despite being a glide. I walk it on the surface, and every time it makes a turn, the bait goes underwater and then pops out in the corner as it turns. So I see it in the corners. It's unlike anything else. There are baits that have huge followings that are special. There's baits that have huge followings that I think are garbage. There are some baits that fly under the radar for whatever reason that are magical. This is a very unique bait that is under the radar. And it just continues to stay there. We've talked about it a few different times. And I think a lot of people, one, it's a spend. This bait is over $100. There's a lot of tech going on. This system with this spring-loaded weight is what allows it to pop in the corners. And if I work this thing aggressively, I can actually get it to jump out of the water in the corner. I mean, it is unlike anything else. If you're a big topwater guy and you haven't tried it, you should check it out. And again, we'll link it in the video description along with all the others. We've probably maxed out that video description. We may have had to eliminate some colors or some hooks or something in order to fit everything in the video description, but I'm going to do my best because YouTube limits how many words we can have. I will do my best to have every last bit of this in that description, even if we have to get a little creative. We'll try and find a way for you. Last but not least, we've got the Gillkko wake. It's a great little bait. It's got a rattle, so it's loud. That bait has a lot going on, multi-joint with a lip, soft tail. I just finished telling you why I push you to throw a bigger bait. You will get the truly monster bites. But if you just want to get bites, I get it. I totally get it. I don't try to force people to see it my way. I really don't. That is a fishy bait, and it catches a lot of fish. And even though we built a wake bait in the wake bait category, again, Tim and I are not out to sell baits. We couldn't care less. So there are a lot of people that don't want to throw a giant bait. 100%. That is a killer option as well, and totally worth the look. And then last but not least, these I suspect will not make it into the video description. We've got to be out of room by now. We've got to be. But I'm just going to pop this box open and give you a little gander. We get a lot of questions about guys that are targeting smallmouth specifically, and smallmouth will eat giant baits. Like, I've caught a lot, not one or two, a lot of 2 to 3 pound smallmouth on an 8-inch Huddleston with no stinger hook. And they choke the whole thing and get the jig hook. And it's in there so tight, I can't even get my fingers in to get the jig hook back out. If they want to eat a bait, they are going to eat it. But if I'm in a fishery that doesn't have a lot of big bait fish, I downsize my glides to fish for those fish. So the biggest baits I'm throwing are the S-Waver 168. I've got a Magic Swimmer back there. The Gantarelle, but in the junior size. There's another Waver 168. These are 4-plays by Savage Gear, which is a super erratic bait, but in smaller sizes. Little G-Rat, the little Savage Gear we were talking about earlier, the one I said I fell in love with throwing for smallmouth. Killer little bait. And then a Vitalian. There's a Vitalian hiding down there. Those are what I throw when I'm targeting smallies. They're the exact same baits that I'm throwing for largemouth and big spots and big smallies all over the place. But when I'm fishing those clear water fisheries, you know, smaller bodies of water, little rivers with spots and smallmouth in them, and there's no big food in there, I just go to those downsized options and I get a lot of bites on those things, and it's really, really fun. Whew, we've made it. Hopefully you made it to the end with me. Guys, it's only once or twice a year I'm even willing to sit down and do this, because it is mentally taxing. I did not sit down today with a plan. I didn't think this through at all. I grabbed the baits ahead of time so that I could talk to you about them, but I just piled the baits up, didn't think twice about it. It's not until we're sitting here talking that it comes pouring out. And it's because we tell the truth. When you're telling the truth, it just comes out on its own. It's not complicated. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully it helped you. Swim bait fishing really is easy. You can take some basic baits, go out there, sling them around, and you are good to go. But if you want to go down the rabbit hole, you want to target bigger fish, you want to catch them in unique ways, you can fine tune this thing as well. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.